Thank you for listening to the Kyle and Tim podcast, where we have authentic conversations that help cultivate a better understanding of ourselves, our guests, and the world we live in. This podcast is about our guests, getting to know them, their backgrounds, experiences, thoughts, and ideas. We really appreciate you listening. Before we introduce our next guest, we'd like to introduce a few of our sponsors that help make this podcast possible.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Mountain Mule Transportation, located here in Bozeman, Montana. Mountain Mule is a private SUV and truck service, offering chauffeur services in all of southwest Montana. Whether it's your next skiing, hunting, or fishing trip, early morning or late night trips to and from Bozeman Airport, as well as weddings and private parties. No matter the occasion, Mountain Mule will get you there safely and on time. To learn more, visit mountain-mule.com and book today.
Welcome to the Kyle and Tim podcast. This is John Nielson. I'm their guest today.
John, what's your last name?
It's Neilson.
Nielson. What's the heritage of Nielson?
It's Scandinavian, of course. We follow the spelling rule.
We gotta go a little closer.
We follow the spelling rule of we're an I before E except after C, so it's an IE, and it should be an EN since it's more Swedish, but Ellis Island didn't care.
Okay.
So they just made it known.
They swapped it.
They swapped it at Ellis Island somewhere back there.
Got it.
However many generations.
Let's just go a little closer.
Closer still.
We can, Kyle, you could loosen that too.
Yeah,
there you go.
I just have to scoot up.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay.
And that can come up a little, just a hair if you wanted to. Okay, so the name, the spelling got changed. It seems like a common occurrence for a lot of people that the spelling changed. I also wonder like how much. I wonder how that transaction went. Meaning, your family's just taking a long boat ride, and you get off, and you're in a new place, a new language, and you tell somebody, "Hey, what's your name?" Right? And I'm sure there's some sort of documents, but at the same time, you're telling somebody else how to, your name, and you may not necessarily know how to spell it in the new language. So I think there was like a lot of mistakes that way.
Yeah, there were later brothers that came who became Nelson. And that was a teacher who didn't like Nielsen, so they spelled it Nelson. But yeah, I can't even really imagine being in line at Ellis Island like that was a life change. You weren't going back.
Yeah.
And you just were whatever happened. I mean, it had to feel a little bit like being cattle. Maybe exciting cattle too. I don't know. Maybe it's cattle. Cattle going to, there's free range on the other side too. I don't know, but I can't imagine doing it. I've never been to Ellis Island. You ever been to Ellis Island?
No.
But
that'd be cool to go.
Yeah.
Should just like make a trip and, like just do it.
Yeah. Did you guys have relatives who came through Ellis Island or?
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the one in San Francisco? That one too. I forget. There's it's like a San Francisco version of Ellis Island. I forget the name of it. I should know this, but I don't. It's all right.
So it was your parents that came over here? Grandparents?
No, it was probably, it was so it would have been, there were some great grandparents and then there were some great grandparents, none of whom I ever.
And I'm sorry, you said from Sweden?
The Nielsen name comes from Sweden.
Okay.
But it's more Danish, Swedish.
Okay.
And then the other side of the family has some Swedish and Welsh and German, and we're a good melting pot at this point.
Cool.
How'd you end up here in Bozeman? Have you been here a while?
I'm a Montana kid.
Okay.
So I grew up in Havre. And then I went to the Midwest for school. And then when I came back, I ended up in Helena for a while. and then I ended up in Missoula a few times, just back and forth to the Midwest. And I ended up in Bozeman mostly because I was in Missoula and my wife to be was here. And just in sort of choosing where to end up, I ended up in Bozeman. But if you had asked me when I was growing up if I would have ended up in Bozeman, I would have said there's not a chance.
Why is that?
Well, I grew up in Havre, and Havre and Bozeman were almost the same size.
Okay.
Everybody in Montana just viewed Bozeman as a redneck town. And if you were a skier, you liked the skiing, but it was not a place to go move if you were a Montanan. A lot of trucks with, guns in the back. And I mean, those were the kids you knew in high school, I guess. Doesn't mean I knew much more than that. And, all the ag kids came here and that was not who I was. And so you're like, why would I go to Bozeman? Just not my speed. So Bozeman's changed a lot, as you both know.
That's so funny. A redneck town.
But I think Bozeman's had it sounds like it's the image is flipped, or I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay,
It's changed a ton.
When was that? Like, what year was Bozeman a redneck town?
Yeah, well, and that's probably it's an overstatement, but it's
okay.
A kid. Yeah, it's a kid in Montana coming from a redneck town of Havre.
Yeah, and well, I mean, it was your opinion, so that's fine.
Well, I'm looking at another town that looked a lot like the town you grew up in, except it had mountains closer. And it seemed the same, felt the same. I graduated from high school in '87, so that was the '80s.
Okay.
And I think Bozeman was maybe 14,000. Havre was like 11,500 or something like that. So they were surprisingly similar.
Yeah.
What's closest to Havre City?
Havre is the city.
Okay.
It's, Great Falls. It's
okay.
A couple hours. Havre's like totally middle of the state on Highway 2 Highline. We like to say that depends on, the way of the world at the time, but either, Canada's a suburb of Havre or Havre's a suburb of Canada.
My sister and brother-in-law they lived for a little while. They were living in Big Sandy. That's where he grew up.
Mm-hmm.
How far is that from Havre?
It's about a half hour.
Yeah, because I think Havre's where they'll go.
Yeah, it's the big city.
Yeah.
Even though it's not a big city.
Yeah, I think my sister.
How many people are in Havre now?
I think it's about 11, 10 and a half. It's been
it hasn't changed.
Practically the same forever. Yeah. Railroad town, farming town.
Okay, so how'd your parents end up in Havre?
They're both from North Dakota.
Okay.
So Havre was a big step up. Small towners. My dad was a professor and a coach, PE professor.
Okay.
He ended up at what was then Northern Montana College, now Montana State Northern.
Okay.
That's how he ended up there.
And what'd your mom do?
She was a teacher.
Okay. Cool. So, you were born in in the mid 70s
or late 60s?
Late 60s. Okay. Got
68.
it. All right. And you were in Havre from when to when?
From when I was born until when I went to college. So
okay.
Graduated '87. So, and I've only been back a handful of times.
And where'd you go to college?
I went to a place in Northfield, Minnesota, south of Minneapolis, called Carleton College.
Okay. What did you study?
I studied a lot of things until I figured out, which one I could actually get a diploma out of.
Okay.
I ended up as an American Studies major.
Okay.
Just, mostly history, but useful to nothing except grad school.
Sure.
Classic.
But interesting.
Yeah, it was a good major.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to childhood. I just jumped forward to college. What was it like growing up in Havre?
Small town Montana, probably like small town a lot of places. It's great. I liked the fact that you kind of knew everybody. You could knock on any door. You could be a feral kid, even though I wasn't a problem-making feral kid, but mom would kick you out of the house in the morning and get on your bike. And if you're hungry, you came home at lunch. And if you didn't, you came home at dinner.
Yeah.
And you did whatever you did. And you went to people's houses and friends and rode your bike all over town. And it was good. I think some people don't like that too, because everybody knows who you are. And you get in trouble that way. And
I've gone back and forth on that because I grew up in a town of 1,500 people, and there's kind of accountability and there's a connection, but then it can be annoying when everyone knows everything you're doing.
yeah,
They see a car in your driveway. Who's there? Who's at your house?
right.
Who's that?
There's some gossip.
Yeah, why was so and so's vehicle there? All that kind of stuff.
No, I can see. I mean, I think as far as being a kid, when you don't pay attention to all that stuff, for me it worked. I think for some kids it's awful. Too many grandparents, aunts, uncles, dads, that aren't even yours. They can tell you what to do and grab you by the neck and drag you home and those kind of things. But for me, it was fine. I don't know that my siblings would agree that it was the greatest growing up, but they liked parts and disliked parts.
How many siblings do you have?
I have an older brother and an older sister.
Okay. How much older?
5 years to my sister and 2.5 to my brother.
Okay.
I'm the youngest.
What do you remember growing up at Havre? Like what comes to mind? What kind of stuff did you do?
Because there's not a lot going on, and my dad was a coach and taught at the university or the college there. Kind of the world revolved around being outside or being in the gym or being an athlete. It's just what you did. You went to every game that existed. You played all the time. You were in 4 sports a year, and because what else would you do?
What that sounds awesome. What'd you play?
It was what didn't I play? It was
Okay.
probably about
Yeah. Okay. So what didn't you play?
I was not a tennis player, but I did play tennis. So like in high school, you were a 4-sporter, meant you played football in the fall, basketball in the winter. I was a wrestler in junior high also, which somehow you did that in basketball. I don't remember how that worked. And then you did track in the spring, which kind of overlapped with baseball all summer.
It sounds fun.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, wrestling and basketball. That sounds like a brutal schedule.
Yeah, I think somehow the junior high world made them not overlap somehow, but I don't remember which one was even first.
I mean, it's probably awesome to keep kids busy. Be like, all right, like you're doing this today and that tomorrow, or maybe even on the same day, you might have had 2 things at once.
Yeah.
In
the spring,
back to back.
Yeah, in the spring you'd have practice, and then you'd go to the next practice.
Yeah.
And you'd get home super late and go to bed.
Right.
Was your dad coaching everything?
I think at some point, he kind of coached. When he got there, he was I think he was the football and the baseball coach at the college, and some of that stuff atrophied with time. And so he ended up being a basketball coach at the college when I was little. And then as we started growing up, he was, coached us in baseball, and then kept coaching us in baseball, and ended up being a assistant football coach as well. And so, yeah, he put in his time.
Did you like having him as a coach, or did it make everything harder?
It was, looking back, there were times when he was certainly harder on his own kids than everybody else. But I didn't mind it. I think my brother has some different feelings about that. It was harder on him. I mean, I think I just let it roll off me more than I had maybe a little thicker skin.
You were probably in good shape, though. He had to figure out how to do it with the first 2, and then he's got you. He's got the system down.
That could be, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, your parents deal a little different with different kids. And I think I probably was a little easier I was maybe a little less obstinate about certain things. Or I was maybe more obstinate. I'm like, yeah, I hear you, Dad, but screw off.
What were your siblings like?
They were great. Just, small town wise, they were, good friends. I was selfish enough little kid that I didn't pay attention to my sister a lot. I was older, but I think it worked both ways. She was busy doing her stuff, and but they were, nobody messed with me because I had older siblings who would,
Yeah.
it would be bad if anybody messed with me.
Sure.
And I didn't even really know that until the rare occasion when something would happen and somebody would, many years, in my late years, where they're like, "Ooh, don't, that's a Nielson kid, don't mess with him."
Uh-huh.
I think that happened a lot to me. I always think back, what were my siblings doing? I wasn't too worried about I think as a kid, you just don't think too far outside yourself.
Yeah.
But you realize every other kid's doing it too. So it's,
Right.
until you get to a certain age, you're just trying to figure out what the hell life is and what you're doing.
Were you younger or older?
I'm middle. I got an older sister and then a younger sister, younger brother. So yeah. You're what, youngest, right?
I'm the youngest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder what it would be like to be the oldest, because I think different mentality.
Yeah.
Either you don't care much about your siblings and you do your own thing, or you actually are, even if you don't act like you care about them, you actually sort of take care of them, or you have to, because that's, your parents are like,
yeah,
we're leaving, you're in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my older sister was like parenting my youngest brother at some points, just because she's 6 years older than him, and
Yeah.
we had a farm, so it was you played multiple roles.
Yeah. Which is weird pressure to think you have to.
Yeah.
As a kid, you had to take care of other kids.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been bad at that.
What's a good do you have any memories that stick out, like a real Montana story? Last weekend we were pulling skis with horses at my girlfriend's place, and the one gal said, "We're doing some real Montana shit." So, I don't know if you had any like Montana memories that stick out like that.
I was always when I went to the Midwest, went to school, people would always say, "Oh, did you have a horse? Did you get to school on your horse? How'd you go to?" And you're like, "Good Lord."
Yeah.
I was not.
Very stereotyped.
Yeah, there were kids like that, but they didn't ride their horse to school. This is, the 20th century. So no, I wasn't that kid. I mean, I guess the things that, I didn't even ride a horse, I don't think, till I was out of college, maybe ever. It was more of having that sort of free small town existence of, there were times when, my dad was a outdoor instructor of lots of things. And so there'd be times he'd say at, 10 o'clock at night, school night, he'd say, "It's snowing, let's go skiing." So you'd put on the cross-country skis, go up on campus, and there's a good sledding hill, and you'd be just you and nobody else, no cars moving. And, and you can do that anywhere, but it was pretty easy when it's like 8 blocks from your house to do those kind of things. So there was some of that.
Yeah, I guess that's like the Montana thing I'm thinking, but yeah.
Sledding the roads, there'd be times during winter break or something when there'd be some good downhills, and you'd get the runner sled, and you'd be sledding on roads that usually have cars on them, and didn't think anything of it. Didn't wear a helmet. Didn't
Right.
No safety concerns, I don't think.
How do you have kids?
I have 2, yeah.
So question for you, and I know times have changed, but I would imagine that you rode in the back of trucks a lot growing up. Maybe not a lot, but
not a lot.
But definitely a handful of times.
Totally.
Wasn't
really frowned upon.
Right. Well, it was probably it was just like, you're going a few blocks, no big deal, right?
Well, we didn't wear seatbelts either, so.
Right. So, would you let your kids now ride in the back of a truck?
It would be frowned upon. Actually, honestly, they would frown upon it. Like they would be like, "Yeah, Dad, I'm not getting in the back of the truck."
Right.
What are you doing?
Yeah, it's interesting.
They're the helmet generation, though.
The helmet generation.
Yeah, which is great, but there's almost nothing they do without
a
helmet on.
Yeah,
and
true.
They think it's.
I didn't wear one until. I didn't wear a helmet to do anything until after college.
Yeah, I was pretty stubborn about it for a while, and now I'm like, man, all the research I hear about brain damage and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like one accident, and then you're like, that's it. It's just one time, You could have one problem, and
no, and all it takes is, I had a friend once who, was a really good bike rider, and he comes up to a stop sign and he's balancing, and somebody runs into him. He tips over, hits his head, and he's not the same human, and really not the same human anymore. And if he'd had a helmet on, probably would have been just like normal, just would have had a concussion or had some scrapes or something.
So what you're saying is your kids should ride in the back of the truck with the helmets
With the
on.
helmet on. And if their mom had their way, a Kevlar vest and
And a seatbelt.
a seatbelt.
How old are they?
They're in high school.
Okay.
If their mom had their way, they should Kevlar vest. They'd be in a bubble.
They'd have those blow up sumo suits that you can,
Right. Those would be fun to mess around with.
Yeah.
Too.
Well, they make those ones that they even make a bike helmet that has a gyroscope in it. So as you have that type of fall, it's just around your neck. And so it blows up around your head.
Oh, wow.
And so I always think they should just have one of those for your whole body.
Mm-hmm.
You could just anytime you're starting to fall, it just goes.
Interesting.
And you're totally protected.
So they have those helmets for downhill mountain biking or something?
They're a European thing. I think it's kind of came from people who would choose to not wear a helmet because it messes up their hair or something. And so it looks like a scarf and it hooks on.
Uh-huh.
And then just, anytime it's cool. I can send you the ads for it. It's
interesting.
It's cool. It's a one shot use, then you have to replace it.
Okay.
But it's better than any helmet. There's no helmet that competes with it as far as safety.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to see.
Because it it's like a hood. So even your face gets protected and all that stuff.
I'd like to see what's up with that. Interesting. Okay.
Probably wear it skiing.
Yeah. Well, they have these, I'm blanking on the term, but they're for avalanches,
yeah.
right?
Same concept.
Yeah.
Yep.
Got it.
Except I think some of those, don't you pull them? Or are they all?
I think,
I think
that's a good question. I should research it. I don't know.
I always wonder what that's like if it goes off. I mean, it's kind of like, people would say airbags in a car. They're always worried oh my gosh. I think of
not going to go off.
Grandparents and stuff. Know that you're driving, it's going to go off. And then, it's like my grandparents worrying about, the seatbelt. I won't be able to get out of the car if I'm in a wreck.
Uh-huh.
Well, you'll be alive.
Yeah.
Instead of dead.
Instead of across the street through the windshield.
Right. Exactly.
And then you got run over. And then you got run over by a car.
So, you got out of the car just through the windshield. Not a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember thinking.
Isn't that so funny? God.
Yeah.
That way of thinking. Not to say that it's that's I guess you could say now it's easy to say that it's wrong, right? But there's probably things that are changing in our lives that are new to us, where we're yeah, but what if? It's
right.
That's not logical,
right? Well, yeah, and the what if? Because I remember thinking, what if the airbag goes off while you're driving? Yeah, that'd be bad. I mean, I've never ever heard of that. I mean, driving, yeah, you just ran into a fence or a car.
So, yeah, it's interesting.
But not like you're just driving down the road and all of a sudden the airbag goes. That doesn't happen.
I wonder, it's interesting because, fast forward, another 30 years. I wonder, how risk averse we're going to be. Because we're already, you're joking, but you're kind of serious. The Kevlar vest thing. I wonder, the helmet generation and helicopter parents. You've heard that term.
Yeah.
And I wonder, God, I wonder how risk averse we're going to be in 30 more years. I am so much more risk averse than my parents were. The things that my parents used to do, on a it was just totally normal.
Yeah. I'm
you guys are nuts. And they're it's normal. It was normal. And I'm I know, but now it would be wild. It would be nostalgic, nostalgic, like riding in the back of a truck. I grew up riding in the back of trucks, all the time. It was so much fun. My dad would do it on purpose. He'd pick us up from school, and we would ride all the way home. And it wasn't far, but it also wasn't that close. And this is in a suburb of Los Angeles. So it's there's
traffic.
There's traffic.
Yeah.
But we were in the back of the truck all the time.
Yeah. Do either of you have kids?
No. And now I'd be we would people would somebody, forget the cops. Other parents would be send that guy to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, now, if when you have kids, it's like, the car seats. Like you would
Oh,
never,
yeah.
like, what did we do? We just got put in the car.
Yeah. So you didn't have car seats.
Oh God, they didn't even exist. Like,
When
they
did
weren't
car
even
seats come out?
I'm sure they probably came out in the 60s or 70s, but that was for, why would you need that? Like, just put your kid in the car. Drive safe.
Oh, I'm not going to hit anything. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. And, I mean, just think how many times you're in a van, like you're in the back of a van, there's no seats. Or I remember sitting in vans where they just pull out a lawn chair and you sit in the lawn chair in the back of the van. Because there were like, one row of seats, but there was nothing behind that and they had more people. So like, oh, just sit in the lawn chair.
Yeah.
Or just sit on the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as bad as probably being in the back. Well, maybe not quite as bad as the back of a truck, but close.
Pretty close.
Same
yeah.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah. My dad had a camper shell. We just like,
yeah.
We like live back there, man.
Well, now you'd be like, if you were doing that, you'd probably be arrested if they knew you were riding around in the back of the RV without being buckled in, or the parents would, if their kids were, or a kid not in a car seat. Like they pull you over for that, I think.
When I was a teenager, I used to work for this guy, and he'd go across the country, and we'd go to different cow shows. And one truck would pull a fifth wheel camper, and I'd ride in the camper a lot. I was a young teen. I was 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was great because we're driving 14 hours and I can lay on a bed.
Yeah.
You're in there and there's like dishes rattling and everything. And I'm like, this is pretty redneck.
Yeah.
Definitely not legal.
Yeah.
You made me think though, I've got a transportation company and we do, private trips for people, and we have car seats to offer for people's kids. And I'll have people say sometimes like, oh, this is Montana, right? It's like, I'm like, first off, it's a massive liability for me, but yeah, no, I really don't want to take your infant in a vehicle and have you hold them in your laps. But I don't know. There's some people that I don't know what their thought process is when they're thinking that, but
yeah. Well, and how much do you think, because, if that's your business, how much do you think of sort of the helicopter parents, risk averse culture comes from just the lawyer side, the legal? Cause I don't know what driving around in Europe is like exactly, but you can't be sued for everything under the sun in most every other country. But the US, you're always worried, there's always a zillion. I mean, go skiing in Europe or something, and there's no even disclaimer. There's a sign that says ski at your own risk.
And they mean it.
And they mean it, right? Like, you can't sue them if you die while skiing. There's there's no suit going on. If the chairlift falls off, I think you can, but they probably have better control of that than we do too.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I mean, I'm going to go on a tangent. I just got back from Costa Rica, and
it's a different world to drive in.
It was a different world to drive in, but I was standing there on the beach in Costa Rica, and there's not a building in sight, meaning it's like totally natural beach. Like you can't see a building. There's like nothing. It was just like raw land up against the ocean. You're like, man, this could have been from like thousands of years ago. It looked the same thing, right? And how truly natural it is, right? Like it was like untouched by man, this stretch of beach. And then that started to think to myself, like, what is like freedom, and like we've kind of been told our whole lives, like, freedom is in a certain way of like, well, American freedom, right? But then there's like a whole other side of like freedom that Americans have no idea about, which is like it's almost like a lawless, some of these like third world, second world countries are kind of like, nobody cares. Like there's no law that says you have to put your kid in a car seat. There's no law that says you can't do X, Y, and Z. Like you want to drive your car on the beach, go drive your car on the beach, right? Like nobody's going to stop you or whatever it is. I'm not saying there aren't any laws, there are, but there's this sense of freedom that is kind of what we're talking about. Is like, there was a sense of freedom in the 70s and 80s that people don't have nowadays. And I think it goes back to your you're kind of giving the example of, is it the lawyers, right? Because somebody got sued and somebody else got sued, and after so many lawsuits, they made a law. And so now there's a rule in place, and now it's being followed for 30 years.
Right. Or somebody could profit from that law, which is often the case too.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I see an in here to money.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's just like a different rawness in some places. And I think that's what a lot of people really like about, I'll say, rural Montana, is that like it's raw, and the kind of some of the social norms of like big cities go away. And so it's like feels more freeing. So anyway.
Well, do you feel like, Costa Rica, probably a good example of, the point at the top of the list for most people is other people. Like it's your family or it's driving on the beach or whatever isn't necessarily about wrecking nature or whatever, whether that does it or not. It's more about, who you're with, the fun you have, the people you care for, so you're not worried about breaking the law or suing someone else for doing whatever they're doing. It's more about, the people you care about and the people, your community, your family, I just think of the people that I knew, speaking of Costa Rica, there's a guy who, this a long time ago when I was there, who he drove the bus 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he had a family. And so his kids would join him on the bus on the weekends, riding up and down, and they'd get off. And then, he'd pick them back up on the route, later that day because they went to the beach or they went into town or whatever. And that's just what you did. Can you imagine asking any of us to work 7 days a week for 10 or 12 hours a day? And I mean, it wasn't like the guy was making a
killing.
Living. He just had a job and took care of his family, and his family joined him. And, sometimes he'd pull over on the side of the road and he'd be talking to somebody who came out of their house and the bus would just stop there for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, that was just the culture of how it worked. And it just had a totally different feel than we would never do that in this country.
Yeah. And I think that's probably driven economically. I think that there's a drive economically here in the U.S. that doesn't necessarily allow for, and it's more like, when I say it doesn't allow, it's more like a social thing. Doesn't allow for, maybe some of that, what would you call it? Like, there's not space for it, right? Like, can you imagine a bus driver pulling over to somebody's house and just chit-chatting for 20 minutes? There'd be fucking 20 people being like, let's go, dude, I gotta be at work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where, I don't know. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in Costa Rica. I'm sure if the guy's going to spend 20 minutes having a conversation with a friend, people are going to get frustrated. But like, right. People do take, I've noticed in second and third world countries where people do take more time with each other. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's 30 seconds. Right. But that 30 seconds, if you add it up, every person you interact with throughout the day, it slows the day down a lot, I think.
Well, they're just less on that schedule that I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Like, why do we all need to be on a schedule?
Yeah.
I mean, I get why we are, but I do sometimes go, I don't love worrying about the time all the time. And
yeah.
Not that I'm not also a guy who likes to be on time, or as I tell my kids, if you're not on time if you're not early. That's from my dad.
Yeah. Right.
I could see though, you might have a much more personable, enjoyable day if you take that extra couple minutes with everyone and say hello. People will say that about a big city, that no one ever looks at you and no one even says hello. Everyone's very friendly out here generally, but you really couldn't when there's 10 million people in your city. You wouldn't make it a block if you said hello to everyone. Right. So you just kind of get in a mode of, I got to go where I got to go. They got to go where they got to go. Yeah. And I don't have time to make eye contact. And
it's too much humanity.
Yes, it's, I don't know, it's just like a population thing too. And then, I guess a societal demand.
It certainly changed things though. I mean, you realize the difference between cities and small towns. And
yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I really liked about moving here. I've been here for 6 years now, and I remember, and this, let's just say 50% of it is just like my fantasy. It's like not necessarily real, but like it was my experience, and so I thought it was or whatever. When I moved here, I was like, man, like people are making eye contact with you on Main Street, and then people will like open the door, and you're like, and you hold the door for you, and random people say hi, and I was like, this is fucking awesome. I fucking love this place, and I don't notice it as much anymore. But one of the other things I noticed, because I want to say like the second day I'd ever been in Bozeman, I put my headphone in and like made a phone call walking down Main Street. And I noticed, I was like, nobody has their headphones in. And so like, I realized that for a couple of years, like it was like not allowed, right? It was almost like a social norm that was not allowed, that you're not on the phone or even listening to music while you're walking down Main Street. Well, now that's changed. Now I see people doing it all the time. Yeah. And so that just changed in a few short years, where now it's kind of become a social norm. But honestly, if you go back 6 years, you're like a fucking weirdo.
Yeah.
Checked
out like that. Yeah.
And so there's just stuff like that that I think is interesting, and I've noticed the change. I spent some time in South America a long time ago, and this was when like South America. I say South America. I'm generalizing the entire continent. Really, nobody had smartphones then. This is 13 years ago. Nobody had smartphones there. We had flip phones. There were you could text and make phone calls on them, but they were not smartphones. And so like nobody used their phones, because like you used it when you made a phone call and you put it back in your pocket. And now, the whole world has smartphones, basically. And so when I go back to these places, I can tell that there's a difference. The people interact with each other in a different way. Anyway, we got off on a tangent. We were talking about freedom. We were talking about being in the back of a truck, and in Havre, you're growing up in small town. And so there was, what a cool place to like grow up and have freedom that some people will never experience.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Did you downhill ski at all growing up?
I did.
Where would you guys go?
We had the ski bowl south of town.
Okay.
Probably a hot spot for skiers in the Montana tour. It was a one lift job. It's on the Rocky Boy Reservation in the Bears Paw Mountains.
Is that lift still running these days, or
Yeah, it was last time
cool.
I heard. Yeah.
Nice.
No
Cool.
grooming. A lot of gigantic moguls.
Got it.
It was a good place. Well, it was a terrible place to learn how to ski, because there was nothing. It was the get off at midway, death-defying double chair kind of chair that, the scariest part of skiing was the lift.
Yeah.
Like, you feared the lift.
Yeah.
And people fell off the lift with some regularity, and you hung on for dear life because you were a kid and there was no safety bar, and it would start swinging like crazy when it was windy. And
When's the last time you've been there?
Oh, skiing?
Yeah.
Oh, it's probably, when I was in high school.
You're tempted to go back, and
I thought, one of my claims to fame is I believe I've skied every ski area in the state of Montana.
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Some that have now shut down, but.
Cool.
do you know how many there are, roughly?
Ooh. Well, there's 1, 2, 3 in the Missoula area. There's 1, just 2 up sort of Whitefish, Kalispell, I think. And then there was Teton, which was Rocky Mountain High at some point. That's outside of Shodo. And then there's Showdown and the Ski Bowl, south of Havre. Showdown's outside of Great Falls. And then there's Red Lodge and Bridger and Big Sky and Discovery and The Rock, which I can't remember what it's called outside of Helena. Mount Belmont. It's got another name now. We called it The Rock because it's pretty rocky. I think that's it.
Was there ever a lift on like Mount Ellis or over there behind us somewhere?
Yeah, in Bear Canyon.
Yeah, Bear
you
Canyon.
done?
I've skied there
Yep.
too, yeah.
Is that lift still there or no?
It's still there. I think you can
It doesn't run though.
well, I think you can do it as a party. That it'll still run. Or it
Okay.
did maybe last year, a couple years ago.
Somebody fired it up, huh?
Yeah, I think it's owned by the what's the school out there? The Seventh-day Adventist school. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, which I should.
Yeah,
Is
so-
that like down Sourdough somewhere, or where's that?
The school is right at the mouth of Bear Canyon,
Okay.
and I think they own the property.
This would be a good year for it with the snow we've
Yeah.
had.
Well, they'll let you skin up and stuff and go up and
Yeah, there's races out there
Yeah.
on a couple days a week.
Yeah.
There's kind of like organized and unorganized races.
Mhm. It's good for that.
Yeah.
Oh, and actually outside of Missoula used to have Marshall was a ski area. Now it's biking, not in the winter.
If you're driving down 90, you're like coming this way, and you look kind of towards Mount Ellis, you can see there's a couple spots on the mountain that look bare.
Mhm.
Somebody told me that a bunch of trees and stuff are cleared and killed for bugs. I thought it was like they look like they're part of ski slopes, but I don't know if you're on I-90 coming eastbound, like, and you look kind of south, you'll see it. I don't know if you know what I'm speaking of or not.
Well, some of that's the ski area.
Oh, is it?
And then there's a couple cuts that were power lines.
Okay.
And there might be some that look like ski areas because I know they did some logging up there and it was.
Because you're kind of under it when you go like right towards Sourdough Trail.
Yeah.
I was driving a client there and I said, hey man, he owned a place and it was kind of up behind there. And I said, hey, do you know anything about that? He said, I know they cleared some or killed some because of bugs and bugs that were eating trees and that kind of stuff. And I didn't know if that was associated with this skiing or not.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, and I haven't been up there since they did, they closed Sourdough maybe last year for pretty much the year. And because that's our water source.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a fire hazard. So they logged it. I don't know if you saw the helicopters coming and going, but they logged it by helicopter. And so it's supposedly it opened up some stuff. I don't think they clear cut. It's all selective, but that changed the geography a bit,
Mm-hmm.
at least the flora on the geography. But yeah, so I know there's some stuff that's opened up, but I don't know. I haven't been up there.
So did they give you a award or anything for hitting every? You said that was your claim to fame.
I don't know. I got a few other claim to fame, but I didn't get that. I'm sure there's plenty other people who ski at every ski resort.
That's cool though. Are you skiing much these days?
Yeah, it's almost entirely at Bridger just because it's easy.
Yeah,
close to town. Kids go there.
How often do you go?
It's probably not every weekend, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
When we have snow, when you can be selective and not go when it's crappy. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't like skiing. I'm not an East Coast skier in the West, so when it's boilerplate, I'll let my edges stay sharp instead of going and torturing myself.
Yeah.
I thought we were gonna have fresh snow today. I don't know if they got any over there, but we didn't get anything.
No, it sounds like it's coming in
later,
tomorrow morning, but it's supposed to be like 4 days of snow. My kid was telling me it's supposed to be about 2 to 3 feet of snow over 4 days.
That's what the sign on the interstate said, expect snow the 2nd through the 5th. So
yeah,
bring it on. I get excited.
Yeah. It's just more shoveling.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So we got to college at some point. You said you were there for a while, right? Minnesota area.
It was a small liberal arts school, and I was an athlete, and so the there for a while was that I was I was a football and a baseball player when I was there, but I stuck around and played baseball in the Midwest for about, well, I think I played for 4 seasons. I skipped one in there. So I was around for about 5 years after school, coming and going.
You
were playing like semi-pro ball or AAA?
Yeah,
or?
it was semi-pro. I had a pro contract thrown at me as a sophomore in college, and I didn't. That was back when, before the NIL era, where you were an amateur or you were a professional, and so then you were done playing everything if you signed a contract.
Yeah.
And so I did not sign that contract, and then chased it a little more casually after school, just because I like to play. And
What'd you play? What position?
I was a shortstop and a pitcher.
Okay.
But I ended up playing almost everywhere at some point.
Okay. How fast could you throw?
The fastest I was ever clocked was 92.
What was your best pitch?
I had a slider, which is really more like a cut fastball. Which
Cool.
is, I guess, baseball fans.
No, I'm not a big baseball
yeah,
fan.
I'm a pretty big baseball fan. 90.
So,
I mean, like, so that's like 90s, like 92. That's a pretty good moving fastball for that.
Yeah, it was. I was right on the edge, but I just couldn't. I mean, I couldn't throw a 92 mile per hour fastball all the time. That was part of it. So I was more of an upper 80s, and I was an off speed. I was, I was in the like Greg Maddux era, where you had guys who could pitch in the pros, and their fastball was 86 because they had a great changeup.
Mm-hmm.
I was more of that. I was not Greg Maddux, by the way, but
he was a great pitcher.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was I had a slider and a or cut fastball and a changeup and a decent enough. My fastball was faster than my changeup by enough that it, if you put it in the right spot, it worked.
Were you starting, relieving? What were you doing?
I played all the time. So if I wasn't pitching, I was playing shortstop or,
Yeah, it's nothing like today where you can't even touch a baseball for 5 days or anything. You probably pitch and then went straight to shortstop from the mound.
Yeah. Sometimes you'd pitch the first game of doubleheader and then you'd come in relief in the second.
Yeah.
And, the idea of a pitch count, you kept a pitch count, but I think I'd be horrified to know how many pitches I threw some days. 150 was probably not uncommon.
Yeah, I think it's not. If guys even throw no-hitters these days, it's really uncommon that it's one pitcher because they're usually getting pulled by the 6th or 7th inning.
Once they get to 100, they're usually done.
That's when you got an agent that's got your financials in their best interest. That's their main concern. So you're not risking anything.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose, they do all that stuff with, data and I get it. But it does it's less fun.
Yeah.
It's maybe great for a team sport because you don't just have, 3 pitchers who throw all the time. And then when one of them gets hurt, you're done. Like you can't win that game anymore. So, but yeah, it was, in our era, it was much more, you threw until you couldn't throw anymore. And,
did you watch that docuseries on the Red Sox that was recently on Netflix?
Mm-mm.
It's good. I'd recommend it because it's kind of the curse of the Red Sox and when they finally won in 2004. But there was a situation where they left Pedro Martinez in, and they had no idea why they left him because I think they ended up losing the game to the Yankees, and that was in 2003. Everyone was questioning why'd you leave him in. That manager ended up getting fired. I don't remember his name, but they were going on and on about why did they leave. But I think he was definitely over 100 pitches. It was like the 9th inning, and he was throwing the whole game. But that was that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's not yet. It's not as fun.
Yeah. Well, it's a big deal when they bring somebody back on, in the World Series or whatever on 2 days rest, and they'll bring him back, and I don't know. I'm sure they want to come back and they think that's their chance to win, so they do it. But I'm sure there's some contractual piece where they probably had to fork out another $500,000 if they bring them back faster than 5 days rest because they shortened their career potentially.
Yeah. The things you see them doing now, just like you said, the data, they're bringing closers in the 7th inning sometimes, and there's so much.
Yeah.
the amount of thought that's going in and the amount of data behind every move is, and the way they move, they shift everyone because they have the data on how many times a guy hits a ball that way. Well, according to the data,
It's interesting, right? Because if you do that too much, you are skewing the data because you're forcing the data to show you that. Like if you don't give somebody an opportunity to come back out and pitch, well, then the data won't show that somebody can come back out and pitch.
Right.
to an extent,
Right.
yeah.
And so that's, I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I'm saying is it's, if you force it that way, it's going to be that way. Right. Like if you leave, and this was, if you have the opposite, if you leave Pedro Martinez in and he fucking strikes everybody out, oh my God, he's a hero. Well, that's because you left him in. If you take him out and he can't pitch, well then of course, yeah, the data is going to show you should have took him out.
Yeah.
So I worry about that in sports because it's like we're almost like manipulating the game so much. Like Steph Curry, best 3-point shooter of all time. Well, yeah, it's because fucking nobody plays defense. It's like if he played in a different era, right. He'd still be the best 3-point shooter, no doubt. But he'd have less. Points. Well,
it just changes the game. I mean, baseball has changed to the point where, I mean, it's maybe gotten better again because they do the pitch clock.
Yep, has
helped a lot because the game's just got brutally long. But yeah, even when they do the shift on defense, you go. And the thing that I don't understand is, I was not a power hitter or anything, but I hit just fine. But if they do something dumb, you'd bunt for a base hit all the time. The guy at first is playing deep. You'd bunt because it was just as easy as an intentional walk. And now you go, everybody's on one side of the infield. How hard should it be for a professional to hit the ball over there or bunt it over there? I mean, you could bunt it for a double on the side.
And they're not doing that?
No, I've never seen, and I don't watch.
Why do you think they're not?
I think because it's all about home runs and
it's all about the stats
and the the slugging percentage and all those kind of things. So they're just like, well, if I just hit it harder, I can't waste an at bat by getting on base. I mean, there are certainly players that probably are playing that, but they're not getting shifted on. But the guys who are swinging for the fence all the time, they just soon swing for the fence. It doesn't matter if they could take everybody off the field, and if I still hit a home run, it's a home run.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know the mentality.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I wonder if people are like manipulating their own game to see their own stats improve. Meaning they're like, I'm gonna do this or not do this just so that my stats are better.
Well, I think that's. I mean, where I would say for sure you see that because I watch enough football is how many quarterbacks on a 3rd and 14 check down to the 2-yard pass. It's like, well, why would you even throw that pass if you're actually trying to get a first down?
Yeah.
Except to pad your stats.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do they want the best complete? I'm sure there's those contracts have to be written with completion percentage and a lot of things in them. And if you reach those, attain them, you get a bonus or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. All these guys might be having a conversation with their agent prior to a game. Like, hey, I don't care if you get a single. Like, who cares if your team wins? If you get, if your slugging percentage is here and you have this many RBIs, look what you're going to be worth. You're a free agent next year.
Right.
Don't even worry. So, yeah, you can wonder how many guys are even playing for the team. Like, totally skew.
There's probably like with, the over-under on football, right? These guys are like, well, I got $1 million on myself today, so I'm throwing this thing out of bounds.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, it kind of takes maybe it just makes it a different game.
Yeah.
But I do think I might not think the same if I was in that world where you go, oh, my value next year, if I hit, whatever, 2 extra home runs or whatever, I'd make an extra $10 million next year, potentially. It's like, you might go, well worth it to not do something or to do, to throw that. I always think of, my son's a Vikings fan and not a Kirk Cousins fan. And he was always like, why, Dad? Why does he throw the swing pass when he's got to throw it down? Those kind of things. It's like, look what contract he got. He went to the Falcons for however many hundreds of millions, and then had a bad year. And now won't be with Falcons probably, but that's like he made more money doing that than I'll probably ever make in my life on one contract. Maybe because he just threw, he had a great percentage of completion and couldn't win the big game, because in the big game you got to actually throw the ball downfield to get a first down.
Yeah.
Instead of just completing the 2-yard out,
yeah,
gets you nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so maybe he's just way smarter than I am. Financially, he's just a smarter guy.
Yeah, maybe.
Or his agent is.
Right.
So what'd you do after baseball? How far did you single A, double A, were you?
No, it was all semi-pro stuff. So, like I actually got some money to play. But, you played lots of teams, I coached a little bit in that process, coached a little bit of football in that time too. And so that's why I was kind of back and forth.
What'd you play in football?
I was well, in high school I played both ways. And so when I went to college, they kind of tried to figure out where they wanted me to be. And I had an older brother there who was the quarterback. And so I was sort of the quarterback in waiting, which meant I started as a wide receiver, and then I was a defensive back. And then I was used both ways, and I was a punt returner and a kick returner, and then eventually was the quarterback and occasional long snapper. And it was probably I might have been, other than my brother, might have been the only punt and kick returner that was a starting quarterback in college football, maybe ever. Well, probably not ever, but in the modern era.
Yeah.
Cool. You played everywhere.
Yeah. And
that's awesome.
If you're playing against a dumb enough team and you showed up as the long snapper, it'd usually take them 2 or 3 punts to figure out that you were the long snapper. That's usually when you'd get clobbered, which was no fun. But
okay, so after you did that for a handful of years.
Yeah.
So you did you have a job at that time, or you were just playing ball?
So part of playing ball, well, in the off season, you'd have a job.
What were you doing?
What was I doing? Well, I coached football some in the off season. Part of why I missed a year was I was working at a outdoor specialty store and ended up being their buyer. So I got to spend a lot of money on cool gear that wasn't my money or my gear. And so I played a lot in the outdoors, skied, boated, backpacked. What else did I do? And then part of the finish of my career was it was sort of time to quit living in other people's houses and not paying rent, and that lifestyle got a little old after a while.
How old were you when you stopped playing?
I was 27.
Okay.
And so I went back to school and became a teacher.
And what did you teach?
I was I was an elementary teacher. So you're certified K-8, but I mostly ended up in the 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
I spent a year as a high school teacher, science teacher, and man, repeating yourself, I could not do that. It's like I couldn't remember what class period it was and what I'd said. So the good side is it made me be a teacher that tried to not talk very much. And the downside, well, I guess that was the good side. The other good side was I quit teaching high school and I went back to elementary, which was just more fun because you have all subjects and no class period to end at a certain time. And I like that. Got it.
What do you think what's your biggest takeaways from teaching like high school and elementary?
Weak ass kids. Helicopter helmet kids.
Well, there's lots of things that, I was in the classroom for 22, 23 years, something like that. And there's lots of, teaching's a great profession. It's, I think it's struggling right now in part because, there's sort of a cultural piece that's put a lot of negative on teachers. And teachers have helped themselves with that, or school systems have too. But
so you stopped teaching full-time in 22, 23?
I stopped. I actually retired from the public schools in 2020 when COVID hit.
Okay.
That COVID spring with third graders there was just the concept of repeating that for any form of the next year was not
happening.
happen. No. And my kids were in school and things were enough chaotic that something needed to change. And so I taught the next year, but I opened my own little private school and had, well, first it was just going to be my kids as, we're going to homeschool and do our own thing. And pretty soon, if you've been around long enough, I'd been teaching in Bozeman for 16 years by then or something. And you get some parents who give you a call and go, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And you want to take my kid. And so I ended up with 10 4th to 8th graders and just 5 families. So we kept it pretty small and tried to make it a completely normal year.
Where'd you do it?
One of the parents had a warehouse.
Okay.
Which was awesome. And
yeah.
I talked the parents into, we all co-invested in a van. And so that was great because we'd go skiing on Fridays and we'd spent most of our lunch times for a couple months on the ice rinks around town.
Cool.
And we just had accessibility to other things, learning outside. Didn't really need the classroom was just a place where we all showed up in the morning.
Yeah.
Which the classroom was a warehouse, so it wasn't very classroomy, which was even better.
Cool.
I wasn't probably your normal teacher.
And you did that for how long did you do that for?
That was just a year.
Okay.
So what you're saying is you were driving kids around in a van without seatbelts.
Exactly. No seats, just lawn chairs.
With toys and skis and shit in the back.
Toys and skis. Exactly.
That sounds awesome, man.
It was good.
Did you ever think of trying to maintain something like that?
I did. I kind of decided that if I was younger, like I was a little, more energized by the whole scene, it would have been fun to do. It was a lot of work from the standpoint of it was just me, so you're kind of your own, everything from the bookkeeper to the janitor and not that all that stuff was hard to do, and the kids would pitch in and the families were fantastic, so I had it really easy, to be honest. But it was just a lot to sort of be in charge of, and I knew all those families, so knowing that, there are a couple things we had. The 8th graders kind of wanted to go to high school, and they should, because there's nothing accredited that I could do being a K teacher, and you get your school accredited, but that's a whole hoop jumping affair. And then my daughter was in that mix, and you could tell she'd be torn by staying with dad or going to middle school, and she kind of wanted to do the middle school thing, but she would have felt guilty not doing dad's school. And so it's just good to go hang it up and be done. But it was good. Education, we could talk forever about education around here. You guys probably don't need to hear all that stuff, but
I kind of want to hear.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's go.
But it's like, I was always labeled as sort of the outside the box teacher anyway, and I was one of those who we didn't have desks and I didn't do rows, and the kids kind of was a very self-directed classroom, so you sort of teach them how to be responsible for what they do, and
even when you were
in the public school, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a lot of projects, a lot of really integrated. So somebody could walk in and go, "How come this kid's doing math and this kid's reading and this kid's doing something on the computer? What the heck's going on in here?" It's like, well, that's how we do it. And so I think it worked for a lot of kids. It was a good. I would get a lot of the kids who schooled in. They would end up in my classroom where, the teachers would come and say, "Oh my gosh, you got that kid." And I'm like, "Great, bring them on." And some of those are the kids who, really thrived in there. And part of it's because, none of us really loved being told what to do all the time, including myself. And, but part of that was what made it hard being a public school teacher too, is that there's some conformity to it all for teachers and expectations of how to do things. And I would I wasn't intentionally trying to buck the system all the time, but I was just trying to do it the way it seemed like it made sense to do for kids and families. And
How did you do that?
well, there's just some things you'd ignore. They'd tell you to do something and you'd go, "That's ridiculous."
Like what?
Well, like, probably a simple one is, report cards, which are seemingly important to someone. But the whole point of a report card is to tell the parents what's going on and have some record of how they're doing in school.
Sure.
So, you could spend hours and hours and hours. If you spent, as an elementary teacher doing a good job, if you spent less than 20 minutes per kid on a report card, that was amazing. And there's some teachers that spend an hour per kid on a report card. Okay, so, you got 30 kids in your classroom. How many hours? That's 30 hours of work for somebody, and 20 minutes is, 10 hours. And that's just a lot of time when, to me, I'd rather spend those 10 or 30 hours doing cool things for the kids, not writing something down that, as a parent, how many times did you really how long did you spend looking at your report card? 30 seconds, 2 minutes. And, I knew as a teacher and a parent, like when my teacher's kids' report cards would come home, I would look at it and I would go, gosh, I spent 2 minutes on this. I feel guilty because they spent how many times more, even if they did a crappy job, they spent way more time working on it than I could possibly spend even having a conversation with my kids. So I just had the kids graded stuff all the time. So they would just prove to me that this was their grade. Like, what's your grade on? And it was, we're a standards-based world, so it's not like you get one grade math or whatever, but they'd have to prove that this was, what's your grade in this, and they'd have to show me. So you'd have all these conferences during the school day all the time with report cards, and they do that. And for the most part, most people didn't really care and thought that was kind of a cool idea, but there were definitely some people who were like, you can't do it that way. And you go.
So you basically kind of kept a ongoing track record of how the kids were doing, but you made the kids really just show themselves and show you how they were doing, so that at the end of the year that you didn't really have to do a report card. You're like, it's already done.
Yeah. So
that seems completely logical.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's how you would run a business, right? Like,
right.
Like I'm not going to, at the end of the year, I don't need to figure out how much money I'm making. I need to figure out every month how much money I'm making, or every week. Right.
Right.
And so you're like, this is a constant thing. This isn't an end of the year thing. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's not like report cards are due Friday, so I start Tuesday night working on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you already had half of it done and you had some to do in class before that. So to me, it was always arguable and it was always logical, and it wasn't like I just didn't do things. I just did them a way that seemed like it was a much more logical and better way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And just having, kids do, like, why do you have to take every end of math unit test? If they know their stuff, why do you have to take the test? Like, I know they know that stuff. Why would I make them do it? And why would I correct it? What a boring thing to do.
So if I'm a student, I say, John, I think I'm an A and I have an A in math, and you'd say, show me.
Yeah.
Would that be like, just show me throughout the week, or show me right now? I mean, was there a structure to that, or was it kind of?
Well, typically it'd be about certain things you're doing. So it's like, in third grade, which is where I last was, it'd be like, can you add 2-digit numbers to 2-digit numbers? That's a standard you were graded on. So it's like, that's pretty easy. Hey, Tim, do this problem. And it might be that they couldn't do that problem. You say, you give them another problem, or you'd say, they'd go, tomorrow I'm going to come back and do it again. And I go, great. And, you'd be shocked how many kids would not know something one day, which, totally makes sense. It's not like it takes months to learn things.
So true.
And they'd apply themselves and they come back the next day and go, I got it.
Because they tried it 3 or 4 times.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, made a mistake first time, second time, third time, fourth time, I got it.
Didn't know how to carry. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Learned it overnight. Amazing.
Well, the other thing is the inverse is true too, right? Like, I can show you today and 6 months from now, I forgot. Right. And so, like, oh, I need a refresher. Okay. Now I have a refresher. Now I know how to do it again.
Yeah. Well, and then you don't have to, like how many times did everybody spend in school where it's like, I know how to do this and I'm still doing it. And I'm still, like I have homework on this thing again, or they gave me 30 problems today, but I knew it 4 days ago when I had 30 problems. And so you'd never do that. You'd repeat it enough so they knew it, or it'd show up again, but you'd never. Anyway, so that was sort of the world of my teaching. And was, I think for the most part, it was successful. It was a lot of work. It wasn't, the system isn't set up that way. So you have to kind of work around the corners, and you'd have some blowback from other teachers who didn't really like what you did or how you did it, or the fact that, most of the kids would want to be in your class instead of their class, or those kind of things. Which, whatever. Just how it is.
I joined my junior and senior year of high school. They started like an experiment, really, inside of our school, and they called it this academy thing. That's what they called it. And so, really, the only difference was that you could take tests multiple times.
Yeah.
And so you'd take a test, and if you want to get a better grade, you could take it again. And then if you wanted to take it again, you could take it again. I think there was a maximum like 3 tries or something.
And how'd that work for you?
It was super helpful for me because I would like get a C, and then I would study harder and take it again, and I get a C plus, and I'd study harder and take it again, and I get a B.
Well, and isn't that the
and so
point?
then they would average the grade. They'd be like, well, you got a C in the first one, you got a B, and so you're going to get a C plus, right? On so they'd average the two.
Well, and isn't that the point of education, to actually learn this stuff?
Yeah.
Not it's not about the grade, it's about learning it. So
yeah,
like to have somebody do that and actually learn it. How cool.
Yeah, and I don't, I wasn't a kid that picked. It doesn't really matter what subject, with the exception maybe a couple of subjects, but let's just say math or science related stuff. It would take me, I say 4. It takes me 4 times to do really anything in life. Is honestly, like the first 2 times I am terrible at I don't care what it is. I am really bad at it. I don't get it. The 3rd time I'm like, okay, now the lights are starting to turn on. The 4th time I'm like, watch the fuck out. I'm pretty good at this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was like, I wasn't going to get it the first 2 times.
Yeah.
And that's carried really throughout my whole life. But yeah, it was interesting because my confidence went way up as a student, which then kind of translated throughout really the rest of my life. But my confidence went up because I was like, oh, like I just have to chip away at this. And if I put a little extra work in, extra, right, doing it 3 times instead of once, then I'm gonna learn it, and I'm gonna get a better grade. And I'm gonna feel better about myself because I actually know the stuff.
And isn't that the point of education?
Yeah.
So that's, to me, it's like that. That's where I go, is like you're a teacher for kids, and like not all kids learn the same, but how many kids learn by you talking at them? Most of them learn by doing it, having a second chance at it. I mean, how many times did you have, I talked about like project-based learning where you're doing something to get to the ends, and there's lots of things you can do with it. But how many times do you do something and you finish it and that's it? And if you go, oh, what if we did it again? How would you do it the second time? And oh my gosh, there would be kids, the first time I'd pull that one out of the back pocket and say, what if we did this again? What would you do? I mean, there'd be kids that were about peeing their pants with excitement because they like did this cool thing, but they couldn't get it done in time as the cool thing, but they had these great ideas. And then you'd say, let's try this again. And they'd, be out of their mind, excited about doing it again. And then you go like, now I can just go put my feet up and read the paper while the kids are, so engaged. Nothing's going on except work.
It's very similar to how a career occupation develops.
Right.
You build a house, and then you go to build your second house, and you're like, you know what I learned from that?
Yeah.
And then by the time you've built that house, you're like, this is getting fun because I got a system down. I know what I'm doing. And then it's the same way sort of a trade or occupation progresses. It makes complete sense. That's a great way for a kid to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your first time, your first time in anything, you're not good at it at all. I don't care how talented you are. Like, take the best athlete in the world and put them in a brand new sport. They're not going to be good, right? Like, and so, and if you think they're good, put them up against really, really, really good athletes that have been doing that sport for years. They're not going to be good at it, compared to the other ones.
Well, and what if they are, and that's an example on the other side, but what if you are a kid who's a, first grader or whatever, and you can read.
Yeah.
And you're teaching reading. It's like, you already know how to do this. Yeah. And we're going to torture you for how long? Because all the other kids have to catch up to you. It's like, oh my, how to bore the bejesus out of a kid.
Yeah.
And that's where I just think, like, I'm to the point where the systematic changes that need to happen, that we all accept things that go on in the public schools. And, I'm a proponent hugely of what schools do, but I think that things can change and need to change. I mean, in reality, in 1900, how much different did the school system look than it looks in 2025? I guess we're 2025 now. I mean, there's the joke is the only difference is we have plugins in the walls, and that's not true, of course, but it's not wrong. We still had schoolhouses, you don't have you have a whiteboard instead of a chalkboard. You might even have a Promethean or a smart board or whatever, so you can write on an electronic projector. So yes, things have changed, but it still kind of looks the same. There's still desks and people face forward, and that's not every classroom, and that's certainly not how every high school works, because it's not all about reading, writing, and arithmetic. But that's the piece that's.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to an interview with Mark Cuban. This is probably 10 years ago, and it was really more about college debt. The conversation was more around of like, is college worth the money? And Mark Cuban was like whether you go to a junior college or a 4-year college or a private, university or whatever, he goes, you sit in a classroom and somebody's talking to you and there's a board. He goes, now all these universities are building these really extravagant buildings that look awesome, and their campuses are really cool. But he goes, that doesn't make you learn any better. And so he's like, if you go to a college and they have these huge $200-400 million buildings, he goes, you don't want to go to college there because you're just paying for the building. He goes, you shouldn't pay for the building. You should pay for the education. And I was like, oh man, like there's so many. I've watched just the colleges that I've been around. I watched them like tear down one building, build another one. And it's like, yeah, this campus looks awesome. Right. But like, you got to pay for that.
Yep.
And that's, I think colleges, universities across the country have gotten, they've lost their way in just financial efficiency, right? From that standpoint of like, this place is not worth the money.
But what draws people to it, and I don't disagree.
It's an attraction.
It's the attraction, right?
Yeah.
It's like you got to have a good football team. You got to have a beautiful campus that's manicured. You got to have a lot of swag on every student. And my kid's old enough. We've done the college visit scene and all that. Where do they take you on the tours? But they take you to their athletic facilities, and they take you to the amazing places to eat. It's like, well, it is good food, and I like the ice cream machines for sure. But yeah, you're paying a lot for good food and ice cream machines and manicured lawns.
Yeah.
And would I rather have them pay their teachers really well or so they have the best professors or best opportunities for the kids? I'd rather have that. And there are some that like put a lot of money into like the outdoor activities piece or the free bus services for the kids, those kind of things. And yes, you pay for those, but at least you're paying for the things that I would want my kid to have the opportunities to be a part of.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, look, I'm not against building a really nice building that that has the latest and greatest technology. That's great. But like the kids better be fucking learning something, you know?
Right.
And like, you know, they should walk out of the classroom knowing how to do something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just worry about like at the end of the day, if you're gonna put a professor up in front of a board, you don't really need a nice building to do that.
The chalkboard worked for that too.
Yeah.
Or the canvas tent.
Whatever, you know, whatever it is.
Canvas tents are a lot cheaper than buildings.
Right.
It might not be as warm in the winter. But
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a handful of kind of alternative schools around here now, isn't there? I'd imagine that your approach and even what you're doing that like first COVID year would be very appealing to a lot of people around here.
Yeah, I think there's, there is definitely a segment of the population that is looking for something different for their kids. I think the hard part is it's back to sort of the helicopter parent piece. It's a tough, the soup that we're in right now has a lot of people wanting to direct everything for their kids all the time. So it is sort of that risk averse is a component of all that too, where they really want to tell a teacher what to do. They want to tell the school what to do. And so, that's some of the public school pieces, yeah, we'll meet you at the front door, but you don't have access to everybody 100% of the time. And not that you kind of don't, because teachers are very responsive to parents still, but you shouldn't just be able to walk in front of class and tell the teacher what to do. And so then they think they can go to a private school and do that. And so the private schools are kind of torn with the idea of here's what we do, but we want you're our client now because you're paying. And so it's a different relationship. And so it's just a hard, it's a very challenging road right now for
There's a balance between hands on, hands off.
Yeah. And so I think some of it is, there are private schools that have sort of found a niche that people like, it's like, oh, I do this because they do that. I like having my kid there, but there's always somebody that's unhappy in any school, and the unhappiness, if it's just unhappiness and they decide to go somewhere else, that's about the best you get. The worst unhappiness is when they try to circumvent or they try to sabotage things or chase teachers out or whatever. And, you two have jobs. And if somebody was always harassing you about some certain thing,
stop working with them.
And stop working with them. Or if it's, you're working for somebody like that, you just go, I'm done with this. I'm on something else. And so I think that's added to the problems too, because people just go, the people who are doing it go, I can't even do my job. And sometimes they aren't doing their job maybe as well as they should be, but they don't even have the opportunity to do it because they're just getting harassed all the time. And that's hard. Teaching is not a friendly place to be right now. I think that
it's almost like there'd be like an interview process, and after the interview process, you'd have like boundaries. Be like, hey, okay, so John, I'll interview you to be like, hey, I'm going to put my kid in your class, right? And so we go through this interview process, and you're interviewing me too, right? At the same time, you're deciding whether you want to take my kid on as a student. And so, okay, we're going to do this, right? Like I think you're a good person. I think you're smart. Everything that you're saying works for me. Maybe I don't agree on every single thing, but 90% of it, I'm like, hey, yeah, this guy's going to be a good teacher. And then I just have to let you do your thing. And when there is a conflict, right, I have to trust that at 3-6 months, a year ago, I decided to do this, and we weren't going to agree on everything, but I'm going to let this kind of ride a little bit, right? And then you kind of see how it goes. But parents aren't doing that. They're probably jumping in every time and almost like not allowing probably the teacher to do their job. And I kind of can see it. You probably see it all the time in sports and coaching. Mm-hmm. And it's probably the same things happening with teachers. And so parents are kind of getting in the way of letting the teachers do their thing.
Well, yeah. And I think the way I would sort of summarize that, if I may, is that I think it's a two-way street, and I think it's all about relationship. And there are, whether it's coaches or teachers or whatever, they have to sort of accept that this is my community. And so I need to bring not just the kids, but the families into this, the parents, the step parents, the guardians, whoever. And so, but there's a piece of going, oh, if I do that, I open myself up to the critics to tell me what to do. If I'm going to meet with, you're my parents in my classroom, or, kids of the parents of the kids I coach or whatever, if you have that relationship, they're going to tell you what to do sometimes. But if that relationship's a good one and an open one, you can take it as like, that's a great idea. I'll try that. Or like, yeah, here's why that doesn't work. And, when you get rebutted for what you said, you'll understand because we have a relationship. And so it's not just a parent problem either. Teachers, coaches kind of go underground and quit remembering that, like, you just built a community. And so if you look at successful teachers, you look at successful coaches, you look at, successful business people, whatever, for the most part, they're good at that. Mm-hmm. Or somebody in the organization is good at that because they truly do. They bring them in and ask the questions and listen to them. And that's what most people want, is they just want to be heard. And if you hear them instead of shutting them down, you can get you go a long ways. I mean, I'm sure that's part of why my classroom worked for most people. I don't think you're ever going to make everybody happy.
No.
But you try, is that, the whole goal was like, I'm trying to treat your kid well.
Yeah.
And who's going to argue with that one? I mean, they might not like something you do or something that happens in your classroom or how you responded to something that happened in your classroom. But if they see that their kid's happy and likes what's going on and is learning something, it's hard to argue with that one. Even if you go, oh, I don't like John's hair, or I don't like, whatever weird thing people worry about. Like, people really, they protect their kids.
Well, and I think, yeah. And I would say most of probably maybe 50% of what you're battling is the parents' own insecurities.
Yeah.
In that, like, well, my kid's not doing well at this and this and this. And you're like, yeah, maybe your kid today, this week, this month isn't doing well at those things, but give it a little more time.
Yeah.
Let the process play out. And it's not like I'm ignoring your kid. It's that your kid's going to take a little bit longer to do this thing. Right. But they're like, oh my God, they have to learn how to do this thing by this date. That's their parents' insecurity.
Yeah. Well, I think you see that a ton. I mean, it's part of why coaching got really hard. I haven't coached. I mean, I've coached my kids and things, but not much since then. Is that, there are so many expectations that were not the kids' expectations, but they were the parents' expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. A lot of that was that, the parents trying to live through the kids' actions, or have their kid have the best, situation they can have. And they felt like lobbying or talking to you all the time was the way to make that happen. And the reality is that's not untrue, but I think even better is going, how do I build a relationship with this coach? So when I have something, I can actually talk to him.
Yeah. I was just talking to a soccer coach here in town, and he coaches a club team, but he also coaches at the high school. And, he was telling me about a story of a parent who was upset because their kid wasn't playing. And, this conversation was kind of happening all season. And he's like, we're here to win games, and your kid isn't as good as the other players. And so, like, your kid's going to get playing time when it allows, right? And it's not that I'm not working on helping your kid. It's just your kid's not competing at a high level as some of the other players are. And this went all the way up to the principal, and he said, okay, look, I got a video for you. This is the last game that your kid played. Watch this video, and you tell me how many balls this kid lost and how many balls this kid didn't lose. And it was like the video was very clear. And he's
Yeah.
like, look, this is a competitive sport. We're here to win games. And by the way, there are other lessons to be learned than, that you got to look at the whole picture, right? There's sometimes you do have to ride the bench until you get better in life. And that's not just going to happen, in sports. It's going to happen in your career where like somebody's better than you and they got the promotion. So you're riding the bench until you get better.
Yeah. Well, that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, is that, you have to participate, or you have to get better, or you have to.
Yeah.
And it's also a sign of, like we do kind of have a weird system in that, how come we don't have a place where kids can play and not just have to win?
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get, I was there where I liked the competitive piece where we tried to win.
Yeah.
But I was also one of those kids who played all the time. But it's, Bozeman's a frightening place from the standpoint of, there's parents who have fifth graders who are worried about their kid making the high school soccer team. And if they don't do this camp or play all year round, they're never going to make it. And you go, yeah, the chances that your kid's going to, all the kids playing in fifth grade relative to the few kids that are playing in high school, the chances are not very good.
Yeah.
If you think your kid's going to play in college, it's even less so.
Mm-hmm.
And, why did we create that system in the first place? Like, why don't we have a bunch of kids playing soccer or basketball or, where there can be the here's the team that travels and wins, and here's the teams that play.
Yeah.
Because how do you develop that kid who's not riding the bench? Like, how's he get better?
Play.
By sitting on the bench?
No.
And he doesn't.
Playing.
And so we have a system unlike almost everybody else who has really, how does Canada put out a soccer team? And they only have, 2 or 20 million people, 30 million people, something in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way their pool of soccer players is teeny, or hockey players is teeny compared to the US.
So that's some of that stuff happens naturally, right? Like what I mean by naturally is like geographically, right? Where like if you were to take the best soccer players in the country, they come from places where the weather's warm, where it doesn't rain a lot, and you can play soccer all the time.
Right.
Where are the best hockey players? Well, they're in the northern part of the United States. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because it's cold and there's ice and they can play, right? And so, so what I'm saying is like that. Some of that stuff happens naturally, like in Southern California where I grew up. Like there's a place to play soccer for everybody, because you can be elite and you can suck, and there's a place to play for you on all levels. And that's just because there's a gazillion leagues. In Montana, there's not a gazillion leagues,
right,
because we live in a low population state where it rains and it snows a bunch.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, good luck playing a lot of soccer.
Right. Well, and I think that's how it should be. It should be more Southern California oriented in terms of access. But, I used to recruit for college, and it's still true. Like the big schools, they will not recruit a one sport athlete in high school. Why? Because almost none of them, like literally, when we did it, it was 3%, so mid-90s, 3% of one sport athletes would show up in their freshman year. And this is all colleges, and 3% were there their sophomore year. That's terrible. Like,
so, I'm not following you there.
So if they're a one sport athlete,
okay, so they play baseball.
They play baseball.
Okay.
They show up in college and they're a freshman. 3% of them would return there. And the numbers probably changed, but I doubt it's 50% now. 3% of them would be there their sophomore year still playing because they're burned out. They're over it.
Oh, this is interesting.
And so the only people that they recruited, and I
multi-sport
truly
athletes.
mean that, the only people that got recruited were multi-sport athletes.
Because they weren't burned out. Because
their return rate to their sophomore year was like 97%.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, that's interesting. That makes me think about there's a cool podcast with John McEnroe, who, he says that he does not let his kids only play tennis. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I do not let my kids only play tennis. One, because he's like, I want them to learn a team sport. And the other one was he's like, I want them to get exposed to like all kinds of other things so they don't get burned out on one sport.
Yeah. And you even see it in Bozeman. I mean, we've had some phenomenal soccer players is usually the common one, but there's some football players too, are great at, Bozeman High School and they go, and then you're like, man, they're going to be good. And then, you don't hear anything. And then you find out, yeah, they dropped out because they got tired of playing, or they get hurt. That's not uncommon too. There was a couple soccer players recently who went to play for, actually good programs. And you're like, what happened to them? Like, oh, they're back in town.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're making me think about the pressure that gets put on, self-inflicted, but also from parents, but also from their own self-identity. If you're a really, really good player in any sport in high school and you're getting recruited places, man, there's so much pressure that you put on yourself that when you get to college to do well, right? And I played soccer in college, and so I went through this myself, but then I watched other people go through it too, where they would realize that, oh my God, like I thought I was good in high school, and now everybody's just as good as I am or better than me.
Right.
And that is daunting.
Yeah.
It is so daunting because you're like, man, I'm not even close to the best person on this field anymore. And you were treated kind of like a king or a rock star at your home, in your hometown, and you're not at home anymore.
Right.
That is so daunting to people, and some people just crumble.
Yeah.
And I watched it happen to a bunch of people that were like, they just could not handle that. They had a lot of work to do.
Yep. Not being the big fish.
So there's a lot of pressure that they put on themselves, but a lot of that's their own self-identity, their parents, whatever that might be. Yeah, it's interesting.
Was that turnover rate just for the sport or for the entire school?
No, that was just for the sport.
Hmm.
And it was nationally, where it is, it'd be interesting to know what that is now. Cause I know there are more single sport athletes coming out of high school than there were before. But, I still think of some of the ones that I know just from Montana that go, and it's Montana too, where how hard is it to be a football player and a lacrosse player, or a football player and a trackster, or, something. So it's pretty, what are you going to do the rest of the year? You want to, you're an athlete, you're going to go do another athletic thing. And so, but, there's lots of them who've been super successful who are multi-sport athletes. And I don't, the few that I know that were single sport athletes are mostly soccer players. And I think some of them hung around for a while, but, anyway, so that number may have changed a little because I think there's more in the pool, but I think it's still the couple college coaches I know still they're uninterested in single sport athletes. It doesn't mean they wouldn't take them because, there are times when you go, yeah, that kid's a 300-pound fast high school lineman. I think I'll take him. I'll take that chance.
Yeah.
Because we could use him. But, if you don't get more than a year out of him, it's not very useful. Because as we know, I was in the same boat. I got there and I go, man, the difference between high school football and college football is all of a sudden everybody on the field got fast.
Yeah, we picked up my coach. Now I'm thinking back, we recruited guys that also ran track, which makes sense for soccer, but
yeah,
they were fucking hauling ass at track, and then they got out on the soccer field, and you put those two skills together, and you got a hell of a player.
Yeah. Speed is a beneficial thing.
Such a game changer in college.
Yeah.
Like the difference between speed from high school to college is phenomenal, and just pure strength.
Yeah.
If you think you're strong in high school, you maybe they're one of the strongest kids for let's say your body weight, height, and weight. You are so average when you get to college. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, I experienced that too.
Are you teaching at all now?
So now I technically retired and then had my solo year. And then, I usually say that I got talked into it. I did get talked into it, but I got talked at, but I actually ran for office. So I am the county superintendent of schools now. So.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
So which
Dude.
is a total, it's a totally different, job. And I would have never said, oh, I have any interest in being an administrator. I had great administrators when I was a teacher, mostly because they supported what I did and let me do things. And so I thought, well, I can use that in some fashion. And it's a super weird job when it's elected, which is also super weird.
Who talked you into it?
It was, I had a lot of great parents, some of whom are very involved and invested in how things go on for kids. Whether it's through, they're part of nonprofits or they're whatever. They're just super caring people for the big picture. And they're like, we totally need you right now. And you're like, oh, I don't know about that. But it's been good. We definitely they had some years of a different sort of outlook on how that job runs and all that. And I think they just did it different. And so my view is more of how do we, bring the schools back together and how do we attach them back to their communities and let their communities know what's going on and help them be supportive and help them pass levies. And not that that's, really changing right now for lots of reasons, but I think, help try to build a better community and make it better for kids. And how do you, and that's not my doing. It's more of like, we have some really great administrators in the county, and we have some really, we're really lucky. We have really good teachers in this part of the state. There's parts of the state that really struggle to get really good educators, and part of it's because people want to live in Bozeman, even if they can't afford to live in Bozeman. So it's just good, really good people to work with, and they do care, and they do want to do the right thing, and they don't just care. I mean, I guess the care piece. I like to think of all teachers are doing sort of their civic service by being a teacher, and a lot of people I think teachers are like when you hear the news is bad, they're striking or they're doing certain things. It's teachers being about teachers. It's like, well, that happens because they do have to live. But man, I just almost never run across a teacher who doesn't care more about kids and what's going on and doing the best thing they can do. And that's just super heartening when your fingerprint's as big as mine is now to go, oh, there's just good people doing this. And there's good people who are getting burned out, and there's good people who are super frustrated, but at least they're still good people. And that's great. How do we keep them, and how do we pay them, and how do we recruit more of those people to the job? And so that's kind of my job I work with all 16 school districts, which that's the most in the state. I have 16 in one county.
You're working with a school up in Big Sky and then all down here. Yep.
Yeah. So all the way from west to, of Little Mom. I'm in charge. The office is in charge of the 4, 1, and 2 room schoolhouses, which a lot of people don't even know we have those in the county. So they have anywhere from 8 kids to 17 kids in those schools. And so I do the administrative work for them, but you interact with everybody from Three Forks to west, to Bozeman and Belgrade. And of course, the big schools are very good at doing their own thing and managing things, in part because they have personnel. But, some of the schools that are even fair sized schools, Montfortin is a K-8 school between us and Belgrade. They're kind of busting at the seams, and, they have their 3 administrators they wear about 42 hats each. And so
they do it all.
Yeah. And so there's just times when, they're pulling their hair out, or they have questions, or they need some help, and not that they can't do it, but they're stretched. Whereas a Bozeman has more secretaries and more departments that, deal with, like they have a little special ed department, and it's, you have people running those things, partly because they have 7,000 kids, but, anyway, so yeah, you deal with everybody, but there's all these things with, busing and their levies, and there's a lot of weird things. And we do all the homeschool stuff, private school stuff comes through us, my office. And, So it's a very diverse job. It's one of those jobs where you show up in the morning thinking you're going to do something, and by the time you leave, you never even thought about the thing you were going to do, because you get phone calls or emails.
How long have you been doing it?
Just finished my second year. It's a 4-year term. So
What are you feeling like you want to keep doing it?
I've kind of left that, like, I was talking to my wife recently, same conversation of like, I sort of said, I'm not even going to think about it until I'm kind of done with the 3rd year, because that's when you'd have to think about what you're going to do next. And it keeps kind of cropping up lately of part of that's, political climate changes, and, they do super weird things like, we're going to cut all grant funding, which, just so you know, if that actually happened, the world would almost cease to operate for somewhere, because the universities would be completely screwed. Some of the little schools would lose half their funding if they lost federal funding. I mean, it can't happen is basically the simple way. So it's one of those, I just go, that's ridiculous. Like, whoever tried that has no concept of what's going on, which of course it got rescinded, and, they would have been sued, or they would have had like 10,000, they would have had like 10 million parents, they would have thought January 6th was a small thing, just because, parent, you can't do that to parents. Like, that's, schools or daycare, and across the country, like, anyway. So there's certain things that make you go, I don't know if I want to deal with all that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you go, well, that's why you get into this, is like, you need people who can
Make a difference.
can stay on course. And, I've always, like, I suppose it was growing up with teachers and people who were very community oriented in my family. Like, that's what you do, is you care for other people. And it's hard in a time when you see a country that has kind of gone, why? I thought that was the deal. Like, you cared for other people, whether you're in this country or some other country, and you start watching your own country seemingly not care about other people other than themselves. And you go, oh my gosh, that's just hard. And so you kind of go, nope, I need to stick that out. I'm one of those who are, whether I make a big difference, like, that's not the point. You hope you make some difference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that why you're here, is to do something good for other people or the world or the planet or whatever your 2 cents are? But it's not just about me. And so does that mean I would do it for another 4 years? At this point, I don't know, but it's, some of it's the people you work with too. And I'm sure I could be swayed a little bit by them saying, yeah, we're tired of you, John. Or the opposite. So
you said your wife's a teacher? Is she still teaching?
No, she's a counselor by trade. So she's thankfully kind of out of the profession, but she's also sort of in the same version of, like, she helps people, and that's the point of what goes on. So
this is a very broad question, but I mean, like, what does a day in your current role look like? Or what are you like, what are you trying to, like, some objectives, or how do you sort of go about making any sort of change or impact?
That's a good question. I don't know that it's a planned, there's plans where you go, like, the whole idea is dealing with people. So the days that drive me crazy are the days when I'm staring at I have 2 screens. That's a problem. And that speaks to the job when you have 2 screens, I've decided, because you have too many things going on. You need 2 screens to keep track of all the things. Do you guys have 2 screens?
I have a second one at home, and I try to never be using it.
I know it's really nice, but I start to realize, oh my gosh, I couldn't even do this stuff without 2 screens, because you got spreadsheets open or, whatever. Anyway, I don't love the days of staring at the screen. It's the days when you're out talking to people or helping people, or they call. So there's not a lot of plan for what good things you're going to do in that day. But, there is that amount of, there's some pieces you keep in mind of, trying to be responsive, trying to help people. A lot of it is, amazingly, is people are grumpy. You don't get, like, you rarely get a good call that says, gosh, John, thanks so much for, who does? Nobody does. But I get a lot of the problems. But it's amazing how there's just so many people who they call with a complaint or a grumpiness. And when you're all done, you're like, oh my gosh, they actually said, thank you so much, or thanks, whatever. And I don't even know if I did anything other than, I guess, I listened to them. And so there's days like that where you go, well, I only had 5 super grumpy people, but they weren't bad calls. Like nobody screamed, or they screamed at me only for the first couple minutes, and then they got something answered.
What are they screaming at you about?
Well, it's personal. It's their kid. Something's not working at school, or they don't understand why some policy is some certain way that doesn't allow them to play a sport, or to go to this school, or to pull their kid out, or whatever. And they're usually things that neither of us can change. It's if you really want to change that, you need to talk to your legislator and wait for a couple of years, although the legislature's in session right now, which is always an event. But a lot of it is just they're frustrated, and so they're frustrated, and their kid's not doing well or not being successful, and you just try to give them some options, help them out, let them understand.
Mm-hmm. If how should I word this? If there was something that you think you could realistically change, if you had the support to do it, whether that's resources, money, people, what would it be that you'd want to change? And maybe it's not, maybe you can't accomplish it in 2 years, but maybe it was a 5, 6, 7, 10-year kind of goal, or whatever. It can be short, it can be long. I'm just trying to give you options of what would you change if you had the resources and support.
That's a good big question. I like good big questions. I probably have a lot.
You're in a good big job.
I probably have a lot of big answers for you, but I'll use this one. There's 16 school districts, and there's I don't even have the number on top of.
Now I know why you got all these spreadsheets.
Yeah. 21,000 plus kids going K-12-ish in the county. We have, I was trying to think of the number of private schools. We have a pretty good diversity of public and private schools, from, 1 and 2 room schools that are multi-grade to, big high schools, fairly big private high schools. So our options for families are really good. And there's really not there's almost everywhere you go somewhere. I mean, little parts of Montana, it's hard because there's no other options, but we just don't have bad schools in the county. I mean, there's schools that do certain things better. There's certainly, exciting teachers and less exciting teachers, or there's places that people have more issues with, or there's some that are a little better funded based upon how their budgets work out. I mean, everybody gets kind of the same funding, but some are under different pressures than others. But we're really lucky to have really good options. And we have, the legislature kind of handed it to us 2 years ago, and I think everybody thought it would be a terrible thing. And it has been for other parts of the state, but there's an open enrollment bill. So you can apply, and if they have space, you can go to any public school in the state. So if you live in Bozeman and you don't want your kid to go to a big school, you could shop all those other schools, Anderson to Spring Hill and Malmberg, which are small 1 and 2 roomers. You can pick for your kid. And so if I had, if I had all that support and that drive and people behind it, it would be, how do we make all those schools sort of have their niche of what they do and make it even better? Because some of it's just that we have really small class size, or, Anderson does all these really cool things with school plays, and theater is really a big part of what they do. And they have a smaller class size for a normal K-8 school, where they might have 20 kids in a middle school classroom, and Bozeman or Belgrade might have 30 or 35 sometimes. And so but Bozeman and Belgrade have every sport in the world and a zillion activities and orchestra and band, and Anderson doesn't have all those options. And so, or they're scaled down for sure. And so how can you sort of promote and do the things you do really well in each of those schools, and then let everybody know that that's what's going on, and let people be able to pick their school, and they can, but they don't always know. Like, it comes up sometimes.
So it'd be like a marketing campaign. Not say marketing, but it'd be like a campaign to for awareness, to say, hey, here are your options, and here's what your options have to as options.
Right. And it would strengthen those schools because they'd get people that want that. And that's why they're there, instead of, oh, it's just closest, or it's whatever.
What would that look like? Is it like an online brochure or something?
I don't know. I think, it's always kind of been historically been sort of word of mouth. People have expectations of a school, but there's still people who don't even know they can apply to go to other schools. And it's imperfect as much as, saying all that. It's like, oh, that's a great idea. I mean, if you live in Belgrade and you want to drive to Three Forks to send your kid to school, that doesn't work super well, for most people, because it's not like they can hop on a bus and make that happen. And, if you go to private school, it still costs money to do that. But it would sort of be, how could you get all those pieces of the puzzle to all work together better? And, and part of it for me is I try to get them to communicate. We try to have the private schools in the loop with the public schools and talking about what they do. And it's not perfect. It works at some level. Some schools are great about it. Some are less interested. But I think that would be a piece that would just make them all stronger. And it would also make some of them that are trying to find their way.
I wonder if it's like an online marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like they need to market, and, you guys know, schools don't market themselves at all. Like, sometimes your kid goes there and you don't even know what's going on in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, like, some are learning that's not the way to do it, and that's a piece I would hope to help too, is go, no, you need to tell people what's going on, and you need to share that. And, you don't just share the good things. Rarely. You just be transparent, like, help them out. Like, there's a school board meeting, there's a opening for a school board member. We have, we need people to work here. We need bus drivers. We need lunch people. We need, there's some schools do a great job of, they have a parent who comes for every morning to be a crossing guard.
Yeah.
It's like,
makes
awesome.
a big difference.
Right. And then the parents love it because they feel like they're a part of the school. And, of course they don't get paid well, but they're helpful. And
they're there for like an hour.
Right.
From the beginning of the day, the end of the day.
Yeah. And most people love to be helpful. And especially if they have time. I mean, if you guys had kids and you had a flexible enough schedule,
you just go to be the crossing guard for an hour.
Right.
I don't need to get paid for it.
Right. Would you figure it out? Like, yeah, of course. And so
I'm going to drop them off anyway. I'll just stay for an extra while.
Yeah. And to me, especially, the whole county really is like everybody especially everybody that's mixed with the schools, but even people who aren't had kids in the schools, like, it's a super caring community. But if they don't know what they need to care about.
I think about this as like an online marketplace website where, like, it's like, let's just say it's a map of the county, and you could click on each school. And then once you got to you have your dual screens. So you'd have your dual screens, you click on the school, and then it would take you to a dashboard, right? About like, what's this school about? Right. Or just information about the school, like a company website would, right? When you go to a company website, it's like, who are we? What do we do? What have we done in the past? Who are our key contact people, whatever. And then you could have that for each school. And then you could create you're talking about the whole, how do they communicate to the parents or to other people in the district? You could create like a standard template, like newsletter, and the newsletter would come out once a month. Somebody'd have to write it, which would take work. I'm just saying there could be like a platform built for you. So if anybody in Gallatin County who builds websites, we could probably help this guy out.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an idea, man.
No, that's great.
It's a cool thought. Ultimately, though, it would make a better experience for students, and that ultimately should, lead to a better community overall. Happier kids, more successful kids that are able to achieve better in their, they're sort of in their niche of where their personality fits. And then ultimately you would hope, like, happier parents, better overall community, like everyone for the most part should win from this situation.
Yeah. No, thanks for helping me think that out loud too.
I don't know. It's just an idea. There's probably usually the first idea is not the best one, but like, there's a lot of smart people in this town.
Oh yeah.
A lot of smart people in the county.
A lot of people with kids, as you said, 21,000 kids.
Yeah, and I think that I think about some of the tech businesses in town, man. Like somebody could build that platform like fucking overnight. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like somebody could literally build that entire platform overnight, and then it would take longer to build kind of an individual website for the school.
Right.
I'm sure they already have one, but like, so you could kind of steal. You basically copy and paste some of that information.
Yeah.
And then like the whole, like, I don't know, I'm again, like not the best idea. The first go around usually takes me 4 tries. Like I was saying, you could do like a standard template so that like the schools don't have to worry about the formatting. And it's just like, hey, this is what you guys did this month. These are the cool activities. Here's where you need help. And it's like, we need 2 parents on Tuesdays and Fridays to be crossing guards, so that those parents get an email at the end of the month, and it's like, oh, this is what's happening at my kid's school.
Yeah.
And this is how I can help.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just an idea.
No, it's a good one.
Like the company Schedulicity. You know that company?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
are they here?
Yeah, they're here in Bozeman.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know enough about them, but like, there's people in this, that are down the street that live in the community that like, this is what they do. They build freaking platforms for businesses and communities that connect people. So
that was a great answer to the question. That's a cool idea.
Yeah. It's a really cool idea. Cause you're the one trying to connect everything.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, you're literally like in the middle of getting pulled in a gazillion directions. And if you had help to connect everything, it would allow you to do other things. Right. And it would allow you and whoever is going to be your successor to also do other things instead of trying to battle all these communication fires.
Right. Well, that's, it's the position's kind of the linchpin of a lot of pieces, and it can just be a linchpin of like stuff comes to you, but it also seems like you can use that to benefit because, schools do enough in their own sphere. They don't need one more thing to do for one, but they, if someone publicized some of the good things, that'd be great.
Yeah, that could be, like all the way to the beginning of this conversation or when it started about you teaching I've got a 4-year-old, I guess he'll be 4 or 5 this year, and a 4 or 5-year-old nephew and like almost 2-year-old nieces. And I hear my sister and brother-in-law talking about schools and where their kid's going to go. And I think what I've been doing for the last 4 years is that CAP program.
Oh, awesome.
So I was just mentoring a kid, just going into the schools. Like the kid had moved last year, but going from like his elementary school to his middle school and just kind of seeing everything that's going on. I think it's Chief Joseph that I was last with him. I was like, I'd get stressed out when I go in there. So many kids. I'm like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
It's intense.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm like, for perspective, I grew up on a farm homeschooled. So I'm like, it's the exact opposite, but I don't know. I'm sure it's a central thought in a lot of parents' minds, just where their kids are going to go to school. And then you lump in politics on top of that. And it's probably a very nuanced, complicated thing.
Yeah.
That would be very cool though, to have like a niche, sort of niches, or just there's reasons small ones can specialize in certain things. And there's reasons big ones like in the middle of Bozeman can specialize in things.
Yeah.
It's kind of, what does your kid want to do? What is their...
I wonder if there's like sharing of resources that could be happening that isn't happening to gain efficiencies. Meaning like, hey, this school has excess of this. This school over here lacks that. Well, send that over there. Share. And so, or hey, these 10 schools lack these resources. And so they can all put their brains together and try to figure out how to solve that problem. But if they didn't know that those other schools didn't have those, then I don't know. So it's just an interesting idea. I got my brain going.
Yeah. I have one other idea for you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
It's not really directly school related. But so this is a kind of my personal piece of the puzzle is you watch. So Bozeman's I'll use Bozeman as my example because I live there, but I think lots of communities are in the same boat. They have playgrounds. There's lots of kid programs for like swimming and swim lessons and the YMCA and whatever. So they take the little kids and there's places for them. And even just the elementary schools have more things going on. And then we send them to middle school and it's almost like they're expected to be like adults all of a sudden. I mean, playgrounds for middle schools, like what do they're not going to have swings and teeter-totters like they used to. So we don't even have like a playground. We don't even have parks for kids. So for middle school kids.
When I was in middle school, we played sports at recess.
Right.
Like we would play basketball or
right. And not everybody.
Kickball, handball.
Right. And not everybody wants to do that for one in middle school. But even that, you go you go to Sacagawea, which I think is our biggest middle school in town. And I think it's 2 basketball courts. And you could have 850 kids out at recess. So how many kids are going to play basketball? Not very many. And it's like it takes balls and balls get punctured and schools don't want to buy it, all those kind of things. Anyway, my point is we don't have like as much for that teenager as we do for little kids. And so my example of where this, like what could we have? Skate parks, open gyms, just places for kids. I mean, what do kids that age want to do? They want to hang out together. Like they want to socialize. So I live near Lindley Park. And it was 2 winters ago. We had a bunch of snow in October. And so Bridger's not open yet. And I would walk home from work from the courthouse and I'd walk right through Lindley Park. And one day I'm walking through the park and there I thought, my God, they must have the biggest burial in the cemetery in the history because there were cars parked. The library parking lot's full. There's cars parked on Main Street. And they're all the way, Buttonwood is the one that goes right through the middle of Lindley Park and up into the cemetery. They're parked on both sides, all the way in, and all the way into the cemetery. And later I counted, and there was over 100 cars. You're like, what is going on at night in the cemetery in October? Well, it's not in the cemetery; it's in the park. There were however many kids in what's called the hollow of Lindley Park. And because there was enough snow, they were shoveling, moving snow around, and they were all not even all of them were on the skis and the snowboards because some of them were just there with friends and a shovel. And they were bringing in PVC pipe.
They were doing jumps and
stuff. They were making their own jib park.
Yeah.
And it was awesome for a week because the snow lasted for a week before it warmed up. And, nobody's open ski area wise, so nobody's off doing anything else. They're all at the local place. And you had everything. It was mostly kids who could drive or, middle school kids, some middle school kids. Occasionally some nearby neighbor little kids would be there with their snowboard and, they're probably 10 or 12. Anyway, the participation was massive and you kind of go, oh my gosh, if you could keep that alive, all winter long, what a super cool place. Cause the kids are doing their own thing. They're moving the snow. Nobody's in charge. Nothing's going on. I'm sure there's some drinking and smoking and whatever going on somewhere, but not like they're mostly there to slide on snow and build stuff. And, BSF, the Bridger Ski Foundation, likes that idea. So they've built their freestyle team, free ride team, maybe they call it. They've now built with blown snow. They've built a jib park that's, it's sculpted and built, that's on behind the Lindley Center, which is great. Like that's a cool option. The difference is, it's confined and nobody's digging and rebuilding stuff. It's like, here's the rails, they're built rails,
Can any kid play on it? You have to be
any kid can go be there. So I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
But why can't we have 10 of those? Okay, now the city should say, BSF blow snow here and we'll turn the kids loose. The hospital says we got a piece of property right here. Let's do this here. let's have a skate park. I mean, like I drive by Bozeman High School all the time, and there's that where they tore down part of the high school when they rebuilt things. There's that whole corner that's next to Wendy's that's just grass. And you go, why don't they have a bike park or a skate park or I mean, heck, you could just have a paved ring and have a roller skating rink that's outside that you turn into an ice rink in the summer or in the winter. Like, you know, we don't like, those are all things, they could be little kid things too. Cause I mean, as a little kid could ski on a skate park, but like, that's where high school kids, college kids, you know, they would flock to some of those things, and we're missing. So I always call it kidifying Bozeman. Like, how do we help like people go, we're missing this. And these are the kids that we're turning loose that don't necessarily need to be turned. Like turning loose means they're staring at their baby screen, or turning loose means they're going and smoking in the car, or whatever. When what would they rather be doing? I mean, would they rather be drinking or digging piles of snow?
Digging piles of snow.
Would they rather be skateboarding or smoking behind the, you know, like to me, it's like, that's easy. And the benefits are just humongous.
I mean, I love the idea. I think you alluded to it a little bit, but I want to understand more. What's the difference between when we were in high school, in middle school or high school to now? Meaning like I don't, so that, right? But I guess what I'm getting at is like,
held up a phone.
What's that? He held up a phone. Yeah.
For those just listening.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, that's a huge one. I guess what, so the difference you alluded to of like, well, there's not enough basketball courts or whatever. So, how do you do that, but like have it be natural for the kids? Meaning like, I feel like when we were kids, we naturally came up with these ideas, and then we would go execute them ourselves, right? We'd like, hey, go grab 10 shovels and get your skis, and I'll meet you in an hour, you know, and you know, we'd ride our bikes or whatever. So you're saying that we kind of, because of the phone, we need to kind of force some of this stuff on, not, I say force, I mean, just like, maybe just like encourage it more so that it happens. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. And I think some of it is, you know, we probably had some free reign as kids of some form.
Yeah.
And I think now there is free reign only when the kid just like disappears. Like, you know, where's your high school kid? Oh, they've got the car. They're at a friend's house, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you can track your kid if you want. And I don't, but I know a lot of parents that do. But it's like they live in this really structured world. Like they know structured sports, they know whatever. And then when they don't have the structure, they often don't really know what to do. And we just have a helicopter society where this is sort of that great medium of going, they're in the park. I know they're skiing. You know, what'd you do today after school? Well, I went to Lindley Park and I built jumps for 6 hours. You know,
yeah.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
It's probably just giving them like creating the space so they have the access.
Yeah.
I can speak to this because I grew up on a 200-acre farm, and everyone wanted to come to our house. That's where we always were, because there was never a lack of things to do, whether it was work or something fun. But yeah, we just had the space. Yeah. So if we were, you know, we were making jumps for sledding and snowboards. We were making jumps for snowmobiles when we got older. It never ended, and everyone said, "Oh, we got to go to the Baldwins. We got to go there." But I think the exact same thing would be true, like you're saying, if there's several acres and it's, you know.
Well, and there's all this liability piece of, you know, I mean, I have a mountain biking kid, and so he'd be like, he's always bemoaning the lack of like jump parks and, you know, BMX parks, whatever you want to call them. And, you know, if the city said to him, here's property, kids, here's a bunch of dirt, go make dirt jumps, they'd never do that because there's like the liability piece of them going, we can't do, I mean, there's all those oversights of you can't do this, you can't do that. So then they have to sculpt it, structure it, you know, who can do what, how tall you can be, what age, you know, we have so many controls on so many things where it is almost like we need the farm to open up again, or the city to just relax, or the county or whoever, and just go, we built them like this, go have fun.
It's
like, not perfect.
Bring your own shovel.
Right. And
like do whatever you want.
Right. Here's the part you can't make it over 6 feet high, but do what you want.
Yeah.
Or something. And to me, that's kind of what's lacking. And of course, I always, whenever I bring this up around people, I've been pointed out to, you're like, well, not everybody's like mountain biking and skiing and
Sure.
snowboard. So it's like, yeah, there are other ideas to this that need to happen. Like, could you have a whole bunch of outdoor chess tables? Could you have,
or like a blank canvas and bring paint and
Yeah,
do whatever the hell you want.
right.
Just like get paint all over yourself.
Or you have you have open mic night at an outdoor stage.
Sure.
And, you can sign up and perform or sing or bring a band or, like there's 100 other things.
Yeah, make a sign up list and you get 5 minutes on stage.
Right.
And like whatever you want to do.
Right. Even if there's nobody there except you.
Yeah.
You have a mic.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's those kind of things I think like that would be cool and would totally it'd bring kids out of their houses and out of their cars and out of the background to go like, oh yeah, this place is for me too. Because we do have kids that are great, have great access to, if you have the money and you can go to Bridger, if you can buy a really expensive bike and go to be a downhill rider or be a, we have, NICA and all that stuff, which is for mountain biking. And we have,
what's the one out by Bridger too? The biking place? Crosscut. Yeah.
And all that stuff's, like, I think it's great. And there's people who are working on it, but all of it, like, how many kids can get to Crosscut or Big Sky?
Yeah.
And then they got to buy, Big Sky, they got to buy the ticket and they got to have, bike is not, you can't even buy a $1,000 bike anymore. It's, it's got to be a $5,000 bike to do that. And then there's helmet and there's pads and there's all these things that are great. And there's certainly some programs that get kids who can't even afford it or families that can't, but some can even kind of afford it. But like, how can you make it accessible? I mean, that's why I use the Lindley Park thing all the time. It's like, how many kids in Bozeman can get to Lindley Park in 15 minutes?
Yeah.
And do something. And then how many college kids were there? I mean, I guarantee you there were probably half of them might have been college kids, which is cool too, because there's plenty of college kids who Bridger probably scares the bejesus out of them. And yet they're happy to go with friends and shovel. Yeah. Or to go try like, I mean, it's a baby. It's a, the grind or the whatever the tube they're on is teeny compared to the high speed one at Bridger or whatever. So
that's a great idea.
Anyway, I'd love to see like that would be a cool addition. And, when I'm talking about it, it's often like, it's a Bozeman thing, but how cool would that be if, who was just telling me, somewhere in the county just got a skate park. Oh no, it was a person at a meeting who was from Alberton. They just got their skate park got finished just before winter. And of course, thanks to Pearl Jam, who puts in, I don't know, do you guys know that? Do you know what Pearl Jam is? Mm-hmm. So Pearl Jam is put in, they're probably in their 20th or 30th skate park in the state of Montana.
Wow.
Where they pay for it. The city has to do certain things to make it happen. But they basically come and they pay for putting in a skate park.
Cool.
A friend of mine was he's working on the project. I think it was last summer doing a skate park in Three Forks. I think they probably did it because it probably opened up. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'll share an idea with you that I had for a couple of years and maybe putting it out in the world, it'll start to come together. So I've thought about kind of like call it a community workshop. And so what's that mean? So like, I think like a big warehouse or a barn and it's got machines and tools in there. So like, you think about the coolest garage you've ever been in that just has, whether it's automotive tools or woodworking tools or welding, metalwork or whatever it is. And so it's a machine shop, garage, craftsman, warehouse. That's part of it. It's also like arts and crafts and like, you can make pottery, right? So there's just like, you name it of like what people's hobbies are, but also like, I guess it's kind of like what people do for work also, right? So it can be kind of a blend of that. And then there's like parts and pieces of this warehouse that has like maybe more of a classroom setting. really just a place, tables, chairs, whiteboards, workbenches. And it's, I guess, like almost like a public-private partnership. And so it's publicly funded, a portion of it's publicly funded, a portion of it's privately funded. And it's really like I'll call it a nonprofit. It doesn't make any money. It just breaks even, but it has enough money to sustain itself. People come in and they learn a new skill. They learn a new hobby. And so like, the only way it's a you put in what you get out of it kind of relationship of like, okay, you're allowed to work in here and use all the machines for every hour that you also donate to teach somebody else something. And so I can come use the woodworking tools for 8 hours. I just have to donate 8 hours of my time to teach somebody else how to do something.
Yeah.
And so I think about like how older people and younger people can intermix and share ideas, share stories, share perspectives. And like the kids can teach the grandma, grandpa, how to use some of the technology because they need help with it, right? Like,
Totally.
hey, I got this, grandma, grandpa, I got this, iPad for Christmas. They don't really know how to use it, right? Well, an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old can show them how to use it, right?
Yeah.
And then vice versa, like, hey, I don't know how to use this machine that's 50 years old. It's a 50-year-old machine that was donated. Well, grandpa knows how to use it, right? Or grandma knows how to use the pottery, whatever it is, right? Could be gardening, whatever. Like, and so grandma, grandpa of that age in their 70s are teaching the 6, 8, 10, 12, 15-year-olds. And so it's a reciprocal agreement that everybody has. And so instead of businesses, quite frankly, throwing away all these machines and tools that are outdated, right? Just donate them,
right?
Put them in this warehouse that it's just like a workshop for everybody. And, on Monday nights, there's these things. On Tuesday nights, there's these things. Wednesday. Right. So you just kind of set up a curriculum, a schedule, a calendar.
Right.
So it's just an idea that I've had. I feel like we got to figure out a way to have enough money just to put the stuff under a roof.
Right.
And then the rest of the shit gets donated because people are going to throw the stuff away anyway. Right. There's ranches all over the state that people are just throwing away. I'm making it seem like
the ranch. I was going to say, being from the farm, the ranches might never throw anything away.
Sure, that's true. But I'm saying at some point there's a machine that probably still works that people are getting rid of and don't like. We got to anyway. It's we don't need to throw this shit away. Like let's just reuse it.
No, that's a cool idea because I think one of the pieces of the puzzle too is that, and Bozeman is, Gallatin County is a prime place for this, where there are so many super talented people in this valley that can do anything. I mean, there's people who are, like the premier, expert on whatever that you didn't even know existed. And, how many people have piddled, and a lot of them are people who are retired or, don't have to work much or whatever. And they're, like, oh yeah, I used to build Formula One race cars, or I used to, whatever. And how many of them would love to have some interaction? And the reciprocal piece is so cool because you go, I can think of, part of why, as a part of education, that you have to you can accept money from the state for adult education. And there are certain towns, and it's usually the Bozemans and the Missoulas and their surrounding areas that money gets accepted. They can't even get enough of that money because the call for classes to go, how do I run my Macintosh computer? How do I take a picture on a smartphone? Like they offer classes to do that because there's so many people who are invested and they're still sharp. Their brain still works and they're 70, 80 years old trying to communicate, how do I run that Facebook thing? Mm-hmm. And how cool would it be to have, kids, that's always done through adult ed. So it's usually a retired teacher or something doing it, or some community member of similar age often. And but wow, what a cool way to connect ages too. Cause I do feel like that's a sad piece of society.
Well, I think just like, I do it now, and I'm on 37 years old, and I'm like, these kids nowadays, and so like if you're 75, you probably don't get along with this generation because you don't understand them. Well, you don't understand them because you don't spend any time with them.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's like, and they don't understand you because you grew up in the dark ages. You know what I mean? It's like times are changing. And so we gotta stay together to understand each other.
Well, to point that out, there's a school that started a knitting club, and they started collecting, older females, typically, like often
started collecting
60s,
older females
who would come to their, and the kids loved it.
Yeah.
And so they started having, they'd have, males, females, it didn't matter. They started coming in and knitting, and there were so many helpers that they would have it going. I think it was pretty much every day that they would have, the club would meet, and the kids would pick their days, like, oh, I only go on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And you're like, what a super cool, and how many of them still knit? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it's like my grandma used to knit, or my whatever, like, how does that work, or how? And, there's applications. I think, so I just recently my mom was like this great seamstress. I mean, she's probably, now that I know, more of a tailor than she could sew a bunch of things great, but she was like a problem solver, figure things out, adjust things kind of person. And I just never learned from her. She's not around anymore. And I should have, but it's always a little harder to learn from your mom too sometimes. But there's just things she used to do. I'm like, I'm just going to pick it up. So I just started sewing. I don't sew anything, but I've been told that what I do is I'm a tailor.
Okay.
I'm not a good tailor, but I have great ideas. And it's always with like gear, like this needs a pocket here. Or this should have a zipper.
Yeah.
And like, if I had like I'm sure I've actually, whenever I go to the sewing shops and I start asking questions, I end up with like, 4 or 5 people who work there who are all female, who are all probably, well, some of them are probably my age, but they're probably 60, give or take. And they just they're talking to a male and he's asking sewing questions. This is great.
Yeah.
And kids are the same way. Like they, kids, they love kids. Like who doesn't love kids?
Yeah.
Who like want to know what you know?
Yeah. So that's an idea that I have
so we just need a big space.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't have to, maybe it's not, it doesn't start small. Yeah. It's a barn. It's a warehouse. It's a metal building.
And to add to your idea, like a big outdoor space with it too.
Yeah.
Like, why not
Sure.
have both?
Sure. Yeah. And I think like the sky's the limit. Right. And maybe over time, like it just like adjusts with the seasons of like, hey, this time of year we're doing these types of things. This time of year we're doing these other types of things. Whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to fit in a box, right? Like the idea can go anywhere. And yeah, I think it's a public-private partnership. It's donation based. You want to show up, like it's $10 and, or it's this, exchange thing of like, you have to teach somebody something in order to go learn something.
Right.
And it's open to you, right? Like, it's like, put your, name down on the calendar and it's blocked for you for that hour. I don't know.
All right. Tim's idea. I'm going to go sell that. I'll be talking to you.
Yeah.
I call the county and the city right away and see what they know.
I have another one about homelessness. I have another idea.
All right.
All right. You want to talk about it?
Sure.
Okay. So, we have a homeless issue in Bozeman that has grown quite a bit in the last, call it 5 or 6 years. And we have a lot of storage units in this town. And if you put heaters in storage units, and you put a bathroom, like, and I say a bathroom, I mean like a big block of showers and toilets. So not just like one
not just
single
a-
bathroom,
not a porta potty.
like a like a real shower and bathroom locker. I don't know, you call it a locker room, not a locker room, but a bank of showers and toilets at the end of a storage unit facility. And you allocate a certain amount of storage units that the city purchases that's done with existing taxpayer money. And you say, look, I'm not an expert at this by any means, really know nothing about it. It's just an idea. And you say, these people can stay here, quote unquote, free of charge. It's not free, it comes from taxpayers' money, but it's free to them for a time period. Call it 120 days, 90 days, whatever somebody who's much smarter than me who's studied this, whatever time frame they think is good to get somebody back on their feet, so to speak. You say, look, this person can stay here for that amount of time. I think that's something that we should look at, is that like they can stay in a storage unit. Like now we're gonna have to retrofit these things a little bit, but it's not gonna cost a ton of money to retrofit these things, insulate them, heat them, put some different doors on them or something like that, right? They're already built, right? Most of the structure's there, and then you put a bank of bathrooms there. It's an idea. Help people out for a defined amount of time, and then once that time is up, we can say, okay, we've kind of done our part and said, hey, look, you can stay here for again, whatever that defined amount of time is, and during that time, with their existing resources we already have, we are offering those people help, right, to services that we provide, and hopefully some of those people, not all, some of those people are going to slowly get back on their feet, right? I don't know. It's just an idea that I have, because having people sleep on the, so to speak, on the street or in campers, it's not sustainable.
Right.
And it hurts the city. It's taking away from other things. So anyway, that's an idea. I don't know if it's a good one. I'd be interested in talking to anybody about if they think it's a good idea. I'd love to keep kind of riffing on it, and it would evolve. But there's plenty of storage units around. You have to dedicate one of them.
Right. No, good idea. And storage units are actually growing, so it could easily be if you're going to do a storage unit, you have to partition an area off that is just for this. And
yes.
They do have, I was just thinking, we were bringing up the showers, bathrooms idea. If you've ever been to a wildfire camp for forest fire firefighters.
I have not.
They just pull in a trailer that has all that.
Yeah.
And you could pull in a trailer right next to it. And, not that it couldn't be permanent too, but, those exist. The big thing that I think the governments, city, county, struggle with is that it actually costs money to have all the campers.
That's what I mean.
And the homeless people.
And it costs money for us to pick up the trash and all that.
Right. And the challenge is that, not that it's not in some ways money well spent but it's, if you're trying to help them out, there's no ability to track them or to get them help consistently. Whereas something like this, that's part of why they want to build housing, is that there's an ability to go, are they home? Are they here? Are they safe?
Yeah.
Here's mental health care. Here's, care for your kids. Here's, food. Here's whatever. And when you're camping and sleeping on the street, you might be here for
a day,
a while, and then we don't know where you are for 2 weeks. And
right.
Maybe you're still even in town.
Yeah. There's some sort of there's form of accountability.
Yeah.
Accountability in the sense that, like, no, are these people are they here? Are they doing,
right.
Are they using, or are they attempting to use the resources that are being provided to them? Anyway, so.
Well, and we just should have I mean, I think that's the piece that always hurts a lot of us is that, it's a community. You should take care of people. And I was just in time.
Yeah. My whole thing about this is, and maybe this is a naive and also self-serving thought. So, that's a possibility too, is that like if we're going to pay to help, let's fucking help.
Exactly.
Like,
don't have
then paying for them to break the law and live in a camper and this for a year or 2 or 3 or however long they've been there. Cause I've seen some of these campers there for a long time, right. The same one in the same spot, right. Which is illegal. Right. It's like that's not helpful. Right. And so, anyway, and then here's the thing, people are going to, people would say like, well, there's all these underlying reasons. Yeah, there are. But like the only way we're going to understand those underlying reasons is to actually dig in and try to help. Right. So anyway, that's a storage unit idea. It's like, yeah, partition off of like, hey, this portion of that storage unit area is owned by the city, operated by the city or the county or what have you.
Right.
And maybe that can be a public-private partnership too. Right. It doesn't have to be fully burdened by the city or the county. Maybe it can be, anyway, so it's an idea.
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah. I don't know.
Good thinking today.
Yeah, man. Yeah. What else? What else should we chat? We haven't talked about your family. That's pretty important, probably. It's probably pretty important to you in your life.
Yeah.
How long have you been married?
How long have I been married?
We'll cut this part out.
No, if you asked her, she'd
say the same thing.
She would have no idea. It's been 21 years.
Okay, cool. Good for you.
Yeah.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Any tips on long, healthy relationships?
No. I'm the last person to give advice about stuff like that, but marry the right person, communicate. There's always ups and downs and, mostly good. It's just, you didn't, there's a reason why you pick a partner. Like mm-hmm. It's nice to come home to somebody. It's nice to have a best friend. It's great to have somebody to sleep with. It's great to have somebody to eat with, watch mm-hmm. TV with, do things with. Partnership's a good thing. I got married. I didn't get married till I was like 37. So mm-hmm. I'm with you. And, choose wisely. I was picky. I did well. It's fun to, the best thing you'll ever do is have kids.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Kids are just awesome. I have the greatest 2 kids and you got to commit to being a parent and it's just it's the best job you'll ever have because you get to see them grow up and get to see who they are and help them be who they are. And it doesn't mean it's not impossible sometimes. Like, what the hell do I do now? Mm-hmm. You get yelled at, they blow up, they struggle, they have hard things happen to them. It breaks your heart sometimes. Mm-hmm. But it's just super satisfying. And, what are you trying to do but have better people in the world, and to see them grow up in your own house is really cool.
That's awesome.
It's really fun to watch them become their own people and their own smart, sassy individuals that, are just good humans, really good humans. That's super fun.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah. I always think of my parents with that, and I'm sure they'd say the same thing, that, that was, they're very devoted to their kids and doing our things, sort of. I mean, they'd turn us loose a lot, but they were very, we were just important, mm-hmm. And in some ways, I think it's interesting that I think people view, like little kids as being really important to spend time and whatever. And that is totally true. Like you never get those little kid years back, and they grow up really fast and change really fast. But when they become high schoolers and stuff, I think they really want adult parent interaction, and sometimes we're just like turn them loose and we don't spend as much time with them. And it's like, wow, that's actually when they're super fun to spend time with, because they're their own person, and they're needy in a very different way. They're like needy in an intellectual way, and needy in a understanding the world way, instead of needy in a like, I'm hungry because I'm full.
Yeah.
Which is, easy to satisfy that.
They're trying to absorb, they're trying to learn from you about like, what do you know?
Yeah. They're trying to,
pick up on the, like, how can I take this piece of information and apply it?
Yeah. And they're becoming their own selves. And so it's a great time when like they have insight into you, and sometimes it's a little too honest. But even that's, a good check and valve. It's another reason why you sort of have, why partnerships are good, is like, there's somebody to call you on your crap and say like, quit doing that, or why do you say that, or whatever. It's like you have a kid who's like, I don't like it when you do that, Dad, or I don't like, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't ever really hear myself say that. I just said it, or I just did.
You're unconscious of it.
Yeah. And some things, it's like they test you, like we're in a, they're growing up in a different world, and I'm pretty close to kids in teaching, and it's still like there's things that are like, yeah, but Dad, here's how this works, or here's how the pronouns things work, or here's why, and you're like, I totally get all those things, but I'm not in the trenches with them practicing it and doing it. And so it's like, oh, it's really great to have like, I'm just a better human because of them, because they have a perspective. I learned from them. I mean, I learned from them more than I learned from, it's been my son's 17, like it's been a 17-year learning experience, and it's not stopping anytime soon. And it's the best education I've ever had, is having kids. Because you just learn how to be empathetic, and you learn how to be patient, and you learn how to just go like, how do I help them out without helping them out? Like the best question you can ever ask your kid is, do you want to solve this, or do you just want to listen? You're just ranting right now. Like, you just want me to listen. Because sometimes, like, I'm the same, it's an adult thing too, where there's times when like, you don't want somebody to solve your problem. You just have to like blow up for a little bit. Like you have to get it off your chest.
Yep.
And then there's other times where you're like, yeah, I got a real problem. How do I get into this one? And it's easier with kids for some reason than it is with my wife to have that conversation. So, no, it's great. I mean, I'd have 10 of them, but that's like 8 too many.
You'd be tired.
And you just couldn't be the same kind of parent.
Yeah.
Like maybe like I grew up with 3, and I always thought 3 was a really good number, but 2's just really manageable. Like you can always be really pretty present as best you can. I mean, that's the whole goal, is like to show up every day and to be the best person you can be every day. And if if you got too many kids, it's like, I don't know how you carve enough pieces out of your day to spend time with all of them. And I would miss that. It's 2 is great.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, let's wrap it up.
Sounds good.
I don't know where Tim went, but he missed out on a good ending.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for, this was great. Really appreciate you sitting down with us, and learned a lot about you.
Yeah.
Cool.
You too. Nice job.
Thanks, man.
Okay. When you guys do this?
We do one every week.
And how did you two ever get into doing this? Like, how do you know each other? You meet in Bozeman?
Thank you for listening to the Kyle and Tim podcast, where we have authentic conversations that help cultivate a better understanding of ourselves, our guests, and the world we live in. This podcast is about our guests, getting to know them, their backgrounds, experience, thoughts, and ideas. We really appreciate you listening. Before we introduce our next guest, we'd like to introduce you to a few sponsors that help make this podcast possible.